watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 48 of the podcast, getting deeper and deeper into Steven Spielberg's early career of the 70s and 80s, and kind of deeper in just as Indiana Jones goes deeper into the Pancot Palace until he finds the Kali worshippers, the Thuggee, doing their thing in the Temple of Doom, which is what we're covering today. And I have a returning guest. This is second time on the podcast, Elijah Davidson, who is the a co-director of Brehm Film at Fuller Seminary, joining us today. Elijah, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, it was we had a fun discussion of Inception last time Elijah was on, so go check that out from our Nolan series. Super fun discussion. I'm trying to remember the draft we did with that.
I think we did nonfiction book adaptations.
That is what we did, because it was around the time Killers of the Flower Moon was coming out.
That's right.
Which that movie was great. I loved that movie from last year. But anyways, totally off topic. But but Elijah, why don't you, for those that may have not have listened to that episode, why don't you tell a little bit about who you are and what you do with Brehm Film and maybe some of your kind of independent stuff too.
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, Eli, I co-direct Brehm Film at Fuller Theological Seminary. Brehm Film is the theology and film focused initiative at Fuller. So we do a variety of things. I tell people we do kind of work in two directions. One, we advocate for the importance of cinema in theological studies and in the church. We want Christians basically to take movies seriously and take filmmakers seriously and be nice to filmmakers and all that kind of stuff. There's a long history of Christians not being very nice to filmmakers. So we advocate for something different than that. And then the other direction, Fuller is here in Los Angeles, and we have a lot of friends and students and alumni and whatnot who all work in the film industry. We advocate for Christians in the church, in the film industry as well, and kind of let filmmakers know that all Christians don't want them to only make Christian movies, and there are Christians who think what they do is awesome. We create space for those two groups to come together as well in a lot of ways. So we have a ongoing film screening series that we run where we show films on campus, bring in independent filmmakers, any movies that we find that we really like and think are worth a nice robust theological discussion. We'll bring in and show. We do some preview screenings of movies that are coming out, bring the filmmakers into those. Pretty much always in conversation with filmmakers all the time. We also we do other things too. We go to film festivals like Sundance, take students and friends to Sundance. We have a website where we review films. We have a book series that we edit. Working with other film scholars, Christian film scholars, and out there that looking for a good book series to write for, and try to expand the literature on theology and film. It's not a lot of it. We want to do more of it. So, what else do we do? We have a movie club that I run here in Pasadena. That we watch great movies and talk about them. I have filmmakers there. We just kind of work out of a list of great films that I wrote about before. and then we just do whatever else we need to do to support our students who are filmmakers in particular. So if they need somewhere to film, we help them find it. Or if they need people to hold a boom mic, we'll do that for them too. So just whatever they need, we're happy to help them. So it's a little bit odd to have any kind of cinema studies thing at a seminary, and so we're always doing what we can to support those students who care about that, and kind of make ways for them to bring the movies into their studies more. So I personally, my role, I help plan all that stuff that we do. I'm also our chief critic and probably head writer, I suppose, for things that we do. I write about movies. I write books about movies, and really enjoy doing that. Write reviews, all that. So,
I actually got so last time you were on, I mentioned that I had signed up for the email version of Come and See, but I got the physical version.
Ooh,
so if you're watching on YouTube, this nice little hardback Come and See by Elijah Davidson
too. Yeah.
That way I can flip through and see if you covered one of the movies that I'm covering on the podcast.
There's a few Spielberg movies in there.
There are. I think I counted. I was going through the table of contents before I came on, and I think I counted 3. I think Jaws, Raiders, and Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park. Yeah, there's 3 in there. Yeah.
So so his 3 big blockbusters, I think.
Yeah, they're all, each one of those is in there for a different reason.
Right.
But they all seem important to how cinema developed in different ways. And maybe not his best movies, I don't know, but they kind of but maybe they are. We could argue about that.
Jaws is my favorite of what I've seen so far. So,
I will say that one of the last movies I cut when I was trying to get down to 250 in that book, because there's 250 films in that book, covered in that book. And the last ones I cut out was E.T. It was real hard to cut E.T. And I kind of warred with myself over that a lot, and kind of ended up including Raiders over E.T. for kind of personal reasons. I think, more than anything else, but it could have gone either way.
Yeah,
both great movies.
I probably objectively Raiders is the one that should be in there probably. I mean, like the collaboration with Lucas and all that, like it, and then just like its staying power.
And it gets at the it gets at that thing that Lucas especially does. Spielberg does it too, but Lucas really does it, which is that French New Wave, alt French New Wave thing, where like you take an old genre and you update it, and kind of make your homage to that genre that you loved. And the French New Wave filmmakers would do that, and then they'd kind of like there'll be a subtle critique in there of that genre, kind of, and Lucas doesn't do any kind of critique. Like he just fully embraces the genre that he loves. And Raiders does that. And I thought it was important because I'm part of that book. In addition to being 250 devotions on 250 films that are kind of all their own separate thing, it's also tracing like the development of the art form over time. And so I thought it was important to show how American filmmakers, blockbuster filmmakers, the biggest filmmakers in the world, I mean, you don't get much bigger than Spielberg and Lucas, took that thing that the French New Wave filmmakers did and translated it to the American context. So so Raiders in there for that reason, and for personal reasons, which we might get into as we talk.
Definitely. E.T. would be like my choice of the 2. I actually watched it for the first time for this series since I was a kid. So it'd been a long time, but I loved it. And then
it's just a sublime piece of filmmaking, isn't it?
It is. And talking about it, like having this like long discussion about it, like after that was done, I was like, oh man, I like this even more now, which happens with a lot of the films I discuss on the podcast. I'm like, I like this even more after like discussing it.
It's also, it's like all of Spielberg's best instincts, in one movie. I think we're going to talk about one that maybe is a lot of his worst instincts in one movie, but E.T. is one where it's all his best instincts, I think, in
Yes,
one film, and
it really is. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
delightful.
what was your personal introduction to Spielberg? Do you have any memories of that?
Oh, for sure. It's Raiders, and it's actually my earliest movie memory of any at all.
Oh, that's great.
And one of my very earliest memories. Period.
Mhm.
I think I only have like two memories that are older than a memory of Raiders, and I didn't know it was Raiders of the Lost Ark at the time. My mom. See, I think they showed the clip on TV, but my mom swears that wouldn't have been true, and that they probably were watching it on a VHS copy
Mm.
that they had rented. But I have a very strong memory of the end of Raiders, where they open the Ark and people's face melt and the ghosts come out and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And it scared me to no end. Like I was so little. I was like 4 years old.
Yeah.
And like I remember being just overcome with fear. I remember like cramming my face in between the scratchy pillows on our couch. I can remember the feeling of those pillows, as I crammed my face in there to hide from what I was seeing. My mom remembers like watching just the fear wash over me as I was sitting there watching that scene.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my earliest movie memory, and like I said, one of my very earliest memories ever. And it's fun now. I look at it now and I love that movie, and have investigated that memory a lot and that film a lot, written a lot about it. And I have another little book called How to Talk to a Movie, and it's a really basic introduction to watching movies with kind of your spiritual eyes like wide open, like a theology in film, kind of for beginners kind of thing. And the film that I use to talk about how movies work and guide people through, I use Raiders for that.
Cool.
And because it's in addition to being just a great Spielberg movie, just a great movie, like really well put together. You can use it really easy to like understand how movies work too. So I went deep into that film, like study it whenever I wrote that book. And I realized something about that moment. I was like, that's a moment of divine revelation in a film when the ark is open, like literally God, like the God of the Bible revelation. And that's like one of my earliest memories is like an encounter with God at the movies. I was like 4 years old, scared the crap
total
out of me.
fear.
Yeah, but like absolutely like scared me. But fear of God, it's the beginning of wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So not a bad way to start.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that happens in that scene is like it also destroys the cameras.
It
which
does.
is like
Yeah.
kind of fairly profound for a movie like that.
Oh yeah,
But
for sure.
but yeah.
Almost a metatextual element. Almost. Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably just a narrative thing so that there's no video of what happened.
Sure.
But it's almost meta. That you can't really film God.
Right.
And Indy shuts his eyes. It tells Marion to shut her eyes too.
They can't look.
Not even supposed to look. God is not something we can even look at. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, love all that. That's good stuff.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll so little small tease next week. The episode I'll be kind of interview discussion style talk with Elijah on writing about film. So if this little discussion we've had was interesting to you, then look forward to next week's episode too, because we'll be kind of diving more into how at least how Elijah approaches writing about film. So but yeah, let's jump into Temple of Doom. And this will be a fun discussion because Temple of Doom is kind of one of those I don't know if you would say it's like a love it or hate it movie, but it's definitely like more controversial. It seems like it might just kind of fall into that love it or hate it.
Yeah, it's a movie
even
you have
though
to defend, right?
I find myself in between a little bit, but
it's like one of those films that if you do like it, you have to defend it. You can't just like it, right?
Yeah.
And
I think so.
The pat response is that it's not good and maybe one of the worst Indiana Jones movies. Maybe until Crystal Skull, which people don't like. maybe
Yeah,
even
people
more.
don't like that. I do. I
Yeah,
like it fine.
I do too.
This is my least favorite of the 5 so far, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean I don't like it. I still kind of like it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, we can get into that after we talk through the whole film. But yeah, let's starting at the beginning. Lucas, so when Spielberg signed on to do Raiders, Lucas had told him from the beginning, "Hey, if you do this, I've got more in the tank. You're gonna have to commit to directing at least 3 of these." And Spielberg was like, all right, they're friends. What are you gonna say?
Yeah.
I get to work with my friend. I guess, yeah, sure. Um, and Spielberg, in one of the making of docs that I watched, was recalling that case. And then, so when they started making Temple of Doom, he realized, wait, Lucas doesn't actually have other stories already like made. He he was, pulling my chain a little bit, you know, not in the fact that he was going to have to make more, but that the fact that he had more stories.
Hmm.
So yeah, they actually kind of were kind of spitballed some ideas for the movie. Like, they didn't actually have Lucas didn't already have like a story, kind of like story idea kind
Yeah.
of like planned out yet.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
which
I've read
yeah.
before that they thought of Indiana Jones as a James Bond like character,
Mm,
someone that they could put in lots of movies and
yeah.
just like have a new scenario all the time. Because James Bond has like no arc, like
Mhm.
historically he
Right.
has like no arc. He's just the same character again and again and again, and he has big adventures. And they thought they could do
Right.
it with Indiana Jones. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, probably until the Daniel Craig series he kind of has an arc through
Hmm.
that, but
He does. Yeah.
yeah, other
There's
than
like that
that,
one
yeah.
on a Majesty's Secret Service that now is like very in vogue to say it's your favorite James Bond movie,
Yeah.
even though no one would have ever said that until Christopher Nolan started saying it when he was promoting Inception. To go back to our other podcast,
Yeah.
but it's a fine movie, but it's not really a James Bond movie in the traditional sense,
Yeah.
because it has some character development, and James Bond shouldn't have any character development.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and with this one they actually, something that they started with was kind of just bringing over some leftover ideas from Raiders to this movie. So they had the kind of idea for a river raft sequence, and I think it even started with like the raft falling out of a plane.
Hmm.
And so they had wanted to do that for Raiders. They had wanted to do like a mine car chase in Raiders. And so they just were like, well, we already have these, so we can bring these over, and they kind of like
Stitch them together.
fit
Yeah.
some of the story around to make those work.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't, they fit it in well enough where you wouldn't think like, oh, these are just thrown in. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel like that, but that is kind of what they did. They just kind of filled,
Yeah.
which reminds me a little bit of what when you hear the guy's name, director's name is escaping me. The new Mission Impossibles,
Chris
McQuarrie.
McQuarrie. Yeah, Chris
Yeah.
McQuarrie. Yeah.
When you hear like him and Cruise talk about those movies,
Hmm.
that's kind of what they do. They're kind of
Yeah.
like, we want to do this stunt or this like
Yep.
set piece. Like, how can we fit the story around it?
Uh-huh.
So it's always
Yeah.
fun, and that probably goes all the way back to like Buster Keaton and Charlie
For
Chaplin.
sure.
Like,
Yeah. Buster Keaton for sure. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Or Harold Lloyd. He would do
Yeah.
that a lot. Just
Mhm.
kind of build his whole thing around one big action sequence.
Oh yeah,
And then stitch on a story, like
Mhm.
tape on a story around it. Yeah.
yeah.
Spectacle. Yeah.
So it's kind of a little less than that, but it is like stitching these set pieces they wanted to do into the story that they had. But
Yeah. And it really
yeah.
fits with that basic that James Bond like idea, right? Like
Mhm.
we're gonna have a few action set pieces. We're gonna get from one to the other as fast as we can.
Mhm.
And that's
We're
your
gonna
movie.
have a cool guy doing it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so an early idea for the movie was for it to be set in China, based on the legend of the Monkey King,
Okay.
which I'm not that familiar with, honestly.
Oh, Into the West. Yeah. I mean, that's
Okay,
like
yeah,
the oldest, most retold story ever.
yeah.
Yeah.
That,
That would've
okay,
been
yeah, I
that'd have
didn't
been
realize
fun.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this one apparently has Indiana Jones riding a motorcycle on the Great Wall of China and stumbling upon a lost valley with dinosaurs.
Oh wow.
Is
Yeah.
what I read. So,
A little bit of
which
Lost
like
World in there. Yeah.
yeah. So it's funny because like my gut reaction was like that doesn't make any sense for Indiana Jones, like an Indiana Jones movie, and then like immediately after that thought I was like, wait, it makes just as much sense as
As anything
anything
else,
else
right?
that
Yeah.
Indiana Jones encounters.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and totally fitting in with that old, like the original, like DNA
yeah.
of Indiana Jones, which is that like Alan Quatermain kind
Mhm.
of serial thing, which
Yep.
that was totally the kind of thing that happened to those old adventurers
Oh yeah.
in those 40s and 30s serials that they'd watch. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally fits.
Yeah, so honestly, I'm kind of sad that we didn't get a Indiana Jones movie with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So, but
Well, there's
but
always time for a crossover. They keep making
yeah,
Jurassic World movies. They keep making
yes,
Indiana Jones movies. Why not?
yeah, sure.
Disney owns them all.
Hey, they might. It might probably just won't have Harrison Ford. So,
No.
um, yeah, but yeah, they didn't get clearance from Chinese authorities um, for that idea. They had a second idea that I didn't. It from my research, I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, other than that it was like dropped because it was too close to stuff that happened in Poltergeist.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what that would have been.
Something with ghosts or something
I
like that. I
yeah, I
guess. Probably.
guess.
Yeah.
Ghosts and TVs, I guess. I don't know. But yeah,
I didn't
so
imagine
they
Indiana Jones with TVs, but yeah.
yeah, I can't either.
But ghosts, you can see ghosts, haunted
Yeah.
house kind of thing. That'd be fun.
Maybe out of the radio. Maybe the ghost
Yeah.
coming out of the radio. That would fit more with Indiana Jones. But yeah, they quickly pivoted to returning to well, for at least for Spielberg returning to India. He had done a short sequence in Close Encounters in India and kind of had wanted to return there for a story. So they did some digging, brought on the writer pair that had written American Graffiti for Lucas, which I'm scrolling down to get their names. Willard, I don't know how to say his last name, honestly. Hayek, something, one of
Sounds good
those.
to me.
Huyk. I'm going to go with Hike because that's the easiest to say.
Hike sounds good. Yeah.
It's probably wrong, but that's okay. Willard Hike and Gloria Katz. It's a married couple that had interest in India and had went around collecting art, and they actually had apparently had a picture of a thuggy demonstrating the strangling technique. I'm not sure exactly how they got this picture or what exactly it was from, but they had this pictures, and that is kind of what they anchored the story around, was this kind of ancient cult, I guess you would call it. There's a little bit of like controversy over like whether or not like the Thuggee were an actual thing, or if they were kind of one of those things that like maybe like colonialist Britain kind of made up to like, it's one of those things that's like, oh, maybe there's some merit to this, but maybe it's also like they lump in everything together into one thing as a scare tactic kind of thing. So
yeah.
It's kind of unclear, but the idea is that it was this kind of ancient cult of kind of bandits in a way that kind of looted and would make their way into your home, pretend to be, whatever you were, Muslim or Hindu, and befriend you and then strangle you and steal all your stuff. Is kind of and then but there's that idea, and I think the word thug actually stems from the Thuggee. But there's also the kind of ancient cult worshiping Kali kind of thing going on too. And I think that's more the direction that Spielberg and Lucas were going for with this idea. Yeah, it was originally titled Indiana Jones and the Temple of Death, which I guess Doom is more PG than Death.
Death. More fun to say, that's for sure. Temple of Death, Temple of Doom.
Doom
Anytime
is
you can
better.
say Doom, it's always fun.
Yeah. um, so yeah, they move forward with this idea. Robert Watts was a producer, and he had went all around India, found great locations, and really liked some of the palace he found. I think he called it that Amber Palace. I had seen another name for it somewhere else, but it was in Jaipur, I think is how you say it, Jaipur, India. Several places he really liked. But alas, India did not like the script so much.
I wonder why.
They asked for numerous changes, one of which was taking out the word Maharaja altogether. They did not want them using that word, probably because it's a kind of ancient, respected cultural thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Roshan Seth, who plays kind of the prime minister guy
Mm-hmm.
in the movie, he had said, he was quoted in the making of, he said, Indians are very sensitive about foreigners criticizing anything in their country, which is,
Well, gee, I wonder why.
I feel like that's true of any culture, but
Everywhere, yeah, but maybe especially India.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
especially India, but
Yeah.
I feel like
Colonialism, kind of.
yeah.
Yeah. Big deal there.
Anyways, yeah, so they asked for changes. They didn't want to make the changes. And Robert Watts had contacted Spielberg, and he was like, hey, I found all the locations we want other than like the palaces in Sri Lanka. And we're going to do interiors in studio anyway. Why don't we just like do some matte paintings, build some extra like studio lot sets, and that way we can just shoot everything in Sri Lanka and not have to worry about India. So that's what they did. Yeah, so the only other thing that kind of went into the beginnings of them putting the script together was Spielberg and Lucas both wanting it to be a bit of a darker movie, which is what we get. And we're going to save talk on that for later, because I think that kind of plays into some interesting talk about why the movie is the way it is, some of the themes you get. So we'll save talking about why they wanted the film to be a bit darker.
Yeah. So
but
here's a
yeah.
a thought I was having. Watch this again for this. So the Raiders and the Last Crusade both have a lot of desert locations. You have Indy in the desert a lot. And people love those movies. They're everyone's favorite Indiana Jones movies, right? And then Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull have a lot of jungle locations. And people don't like those movies. Those are the two people point at as not being as good. I just think that's interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah,
that people enjoy the desert ones more than the jungle ones. And I love just looking at Temple of Doom. I like all that Sri Lankan stuff. I like the matte paintings. I like all that. I think it's a beautiful film to look at.
It really is
scenic, very scenic film. And sometimes you watch movies that are set in India or in the jungle, in the Indian jungle, the South Asian jungle, like it'd be very claustrophobic kind of sets and claustrophobic films, because jungle's pretty claustrophobic, but this is not a claustrophobic film at all. Like, so many good vistas, so many it feels open, it moves a lot, it kind of, there's a lot of I like the descent from being up in an airplane in the mountains all the way down to into hell, basically. You go down, down, and then you work your way out with the mine carts back to being back out in the open again. I enjoy that, like, visual, just that visual narrative that you get through the film. I think it's fun.
Yeah, down and back up again for sure. And it's, I feel like it's not as claustrophobic, probably because with a place like as contained as Sri Lanka, you end up with like several kind of like landscapes. Between like jungle, and there's some like great insert shots of like the elephants kind of walking across a little like plain
hmm
or valley or something,
Yeah.
just that are just beautiful.
hmm
And even like there's a wide shot of like the suspension bridge at the
hmm
end that I love that
Oh
is
yeah.
very open. It's, across two cliff faces, a
hmm
big valley, and it's just like a beautiful shot.
Yeah.
That that kind of opens. Yeah, I think that's something that Spielberg does well is giving you these like wide shots, kind
Yeah.
of to show you where you. It's interesting because you don't think of Spielberg as like um, you think of him more of like as an adventure storyteller, or like especially in these first two decades of
hmm
his films. He's adventure, he's fun, he's action set pieces, but he always in all of these films has moments that are like more still
Yeah.
and kind of just taking in
Yeah.
something in nature or some sort
Yeah.
of wide shot of the setting you're in.
Yeah.
Um,
He's got so much John Ford in him in what he
yeah,
does, and
yes.
John Ford always did that. You think quintessential John Ford shot is like Monument Valley, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of big open space with a person in it. And Spielberg does that thing really well. He also has a
Yes.
good amount of David Lean in him too, especially when he gets
Yes.
serious.
That's what I was
And
gonna say too, yeah.
yeah, there's like
Which
hardly
this
anybody better at that than David Lean.
yeah, this was actually shot in, near and around a city called Kandy in Sri Lanka, which is, where David Lean was based out of for Bridge on the River Kwai.
Yeah.
So that was, which I'm sure Spielberg was, like, geeking out over as
Oh,
because
sure.
he's like a David Lean, like, fanboy.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was probably geeking out like, "Oh, I'm where David Lean shot Bridge on the River
Yeah.
Kwai."
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's it is very a very beautiful movie, I think. And we can talk more about that as we go along.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the cast. Harrison Ford, of course, coming back on as
Sexier than
Indy.
ever.
Yes, did
Yeah.
some weight training, some
Uh-huh.
intense weight training to because he'd be shirtless a lot. So
Uh-huh.
um,
My wife, whenever we watch this movie, my wife confirms that
yes.
Harrison Ford in Temple of Doom is about as sexy as it gets. So that weight
Hey,
training paid off.
the weight
Here in
training
2024, it still paid off.
it, it's interesting because he's kind of like the classic everyman body type.
hmm
He's not like super like ripped or anything. He's
Yeah.
just you can tell like he's a strong dude, but
hmm
it's not like in your face. And
Yeah.
I think that's what
He's
people
real,
like.
right? He's
Yeah,
real. He's manly. He's
yeah,
sultry.
oh yeah,
He doesn't have time for you because he's too busy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, it's what's
He's
interesting.
sweaty. He's so sweaty. It's one of the
Yes,
sweatiest movies.
everybody's sweaty in this
Oh, it's
movie.
such a sweaty movie. Yeah.
Which I'd be sweaty too if I was getting sacrificed. So,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's what's interesting with Ford here is, um, he's coming off of like two really huge movies. Like, so in '82 he does Blade Runner, which i- is probably like more acclaimed as time goes on than it was at the time.
Yeah.
But still a really important movie. And then Return of the Jedi, obviously wrapping up that trilogy in '83,
hmm
and then coming back on to do Temple of Doom. I mean, really like Ford in this stretch, basically from like American Graffiti through what would it be like maybe the mid '90s
Yeah.
with maybe
hmm
like The Fugitive or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
92.
yeah.
Yeah.
So just like, I mean, he's just
Air
like,
Force One was like 94, I think. Something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Good
yeah.
movies.
I was trying to like pull something from the '90s that might have like ended that stretch, but yeah, I'm not sure what it would be, but it's definitely like somewhere in the '90s from
Mhm.
basically late '70s to early to mid '90s. He's just like he is the like star.
Oh, yeah.
Um, just incredible run. So really, this is like right in the middle of um, that stardom, which is, I guess, like he's at the peak, which is why he had to be in peak,
hmm
peak fitness and peak shirtless scenes, I guess. maybe he wrote that into his contract. Like, I'll be in the movie if I can be ripped and shirtless a lot. I don't think so, but
Probably not. No, he seems a little chiller than that.
he
about
is.
things.
Yeah. He's it in the interview. He's very like nonchalant when you see him in like the making of docs and stuff. He's just like, yeah, we did this. It was fun. I was happy with it. He's like so nonchalant.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's not a lot to say about Harrison Ford. He's Harrison Ford. He's great. I do think it's interesting in this movie. I feel like he's more Han Solo in this movie than he was in Raiders.
Yep. For sure.
Very much more like, a rogue, kind of a cad a bit. Like Han is, and so
kind of gets what I think is like the one major flaw of this film, which is that it's a prequel to Raiders. And it's not like super upfront about that, like you have to be paying attention to understand it's a prequel to Raiders. And you don't get Indy in his classroom. Like you don't get like down to earth Indy in this. All you get is adventurer, grave robber, tomb raider Indy is all you get. And his fortune and glory line, so it's a more like immature Indiana Jones. But people loved Raiders, so you don't want to go back and watch a more immature version of that thing you love. And Lucas didn't learn that. He did it again later. When he went back and made a prequel to a movie people already loved. But it's, I understand why they did it, like the desire to like not have to deal with the fact, all the stuff that happened in Raiders in the plot, but it makes for a more caddish, roguish, selfish, kind of meaner, kind of Indiana Jones, and it's not as much fun to watch.
It's not it's weird because I think I want to say the setting is just like 1 year before in the movie. Like, because I think this takes place in 35 and Raiders is in 36. So it's just it doesn't, I don't know, it feels out of character for, at least, I don't know about Lucas, but at least for Spielberg to not like have thought through that detail of like, how do we go from this Indy to that Indy in just less than a year probably between the two.
It also undercuts, I don't know if we want to talk about this now or not, but it kind of undercuts one of the major arcs in Raiders, which is that Indiana Jones says like, it's just like superstition and whatever. Like he doesn't believe in the idea of like God, the supernatural, all this kind of stuff. But he really should, because he's seen some stuff,
Yes.
Based on this movie. He's really
I think
seen
that's a recurring
stuff.
thing though with Indy. He constantly goes back to like,
no,
I've seen a lot of
though. No,
I guess in Last Crusade
because Last Crusade is like,
that's true.
There's a part, what's that thing? Oh, that's the Ark of the Covenant. How you know? Well, I know. I'm sure it is.
That's
like,
true. Yeah,
he definitely like, after he goes through Raiders, he actually believes that there's something out there, and that's like explicit in the latest one. He says like, I've seen this, I've seen that, and I've learned that there's more out there than I can explain, and that's a huge part of who Indiana Jones is. And so by having him experience all that he experiences, reeking the blood of Kali and everything, it like undercuts what he learns in Raiders. Anyway, that's my only main critique of this film, really. Like criticism of this film is that making it a prequel undercuts Raiders in a
I was even thinking too, like the character arc, because I think he does have a character arc in this movie. Like he has
Doom.
he in Doom he has a growth. Like he starts with like fortune and glory, like like he doesn't really grow out of his like immature as far as like
he doesn't care about Willie. He doesn't really care about Short Round that much. All he cares about is fortune and glory. At the beginning.
At the beginning, but I think he grows more affectionate of Short Round. I don't know. I don't think maybe about Willie, but
Never really buy that,
he,
do you?
as a Bond type character, that kind of plays.
He's very Bond like. That's what he is. Like, because Bond's pretty callous. He's only in it for the mission. He uses women and other people left and right.
Yeah, but at the end, he's taking the Sankara stone back to the village.
Yeah, he is.
Willie's like, "What about your fortune and glory?" And he's like, it would just collect dust in a museum.
That's right.
Anyway,
something's more important.
And this is more important. And then in Raiders, he's like, all the talk that's like giving context is like, "Oh, you've done so much for giving us stuff for this museum," and that's like all he cares about. And it's like, wait, this is just a year later. Like did he forget the lessons he was supposed to have learned? And
he's robbing another tomb, taking an idol again. Like he learned nothing. So it doesn't really work.
It doesn't. It doesn't work as a prequel.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have said it way earlier than just a year before.
Yeah, might have made a little more sense or something. I don't know. But I'll give Harrison Ford credit though. He plays kind of the caddish rogue quite well.
He does.
He is mostly kind of unlikable.
Yeah.
As unlikable as mid 80s Harrison Ford can be, he is.
Which is not very, but
not very. Yeah.
But yeah, the other cast, Kate Capshaw plays Willie Scott. Spielberg had wanted to bring Marion back, which wouldn't have made sense. I don't know why
because they hadn't seen each other in years, so they couldn't. Yeah, it's been a long time since Indiana Jones walked back into her life.
Yeah, but Lucas was like didn't want to at all, which and so they had 120 actresses apparently come through casting, which is a ton. And Kate Capshaw comes along, which I think is her actress name. I think her name was like Kate Nell or something like that. But she's this 30-year-old, originally from Texas, had trained in New York as an actor, had been in some TV films, and was kind of on track to do kind of the more serious indie film route. It's kind of, and that's what she says. She says that's what I was interested in doing. But she gets connected here with, I guess maybe through an agent, and was like, this is, an opportunity. It could create opportunities for me, even if this isn't
the sequel to Indiana Jones.
Right.
Yeah.
So she auditions, and Spielberg just thought like she knocked it out of the park. She had like all the energy. She was beautiful. So he takes the tape to Ford, and he's like, I'm just going to show you this one tape. And Ford was like, yep, she's the one. So, and then for her, it was kind of, when you hear her talk about Spielberg at that time, she kind of had like this love at first sight kind of thing with Spielberg. That was, it seems like it was a little bit reciprocated on set, but couldn't be followed through with, because he was kind of coming out of one relationship and then reconnecting with Amy Irving, who he had previously been engaged to, and they got married during the filming of this and had their first son like a year later. So kind of put a pause on that connection. They ended up getting married in, I think, 91.
91. And still married.
Yeah, still married. 7 kids. Some adopted, I think, kids. And we talked about in the ET episode how that was the first time he was like, I want to be a father, like, because he loved working with kids, which was really cool. The character of Willie was named after Spielberg's Cocker Spaniel. So there you go. Indiana Jones named after Lucas's dog. Willie named after Spielberg's dog, and Short Round named after Bill and Gloria's dog, apparently, the writers of the film. So
we named the dog Short Round.
Yes. Which I think traces back to a movie called Steel Helmet. Apparently there was it was like it was set in the Korean War, I think, and one of the soldiers calls a Korean kid Short Round, and he's like, what's Short Round? He's like, it's a round. He was basically calling him Short Round because he was letting him travel with them, but he wasn't going to let him go all the way to where he was going. And a short round is a round that doesn't hit the target. It doesn't make it there. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I would have guessed. And it's interesting that it's a kid of Asian descent that's called Short Round by a white dude that's in his country. But Kiwi Kwan plays Short Round, our beloved Kiwi Kwan. Now that he's won his Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once,
Mm-hmm.
which that was my favorite part of that whole award season, was
It's really fun, wasn't it?
watching
Yeah.
all of his speeches, and
Uh-huh.
man, I just smiled. I just smiled every time I saw him like talking about
Yeah.
making that movie, and
So much fun.
yeah, taking pictures with Harrison Ford, and
Uh-huh.
so good.
And how fun is it that like he has that in that very long fight sequence. He has a moment where he does some like kind of karate moves or whatever,
Yeah.
where he like jumps around and kicks and stuff, which is kind of unbelievable. But everything's unbelievable in this movie and
Yes.
Indiana Jones movies. But
Yeah.
but he does that, and then I just was thinking about like when he first starts using the fanny pack and stuff to fight,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
all the stuff that he does and everything everywhere. I was like, yeah, it just comes full circle. You know?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah,
Super fun.
so they went through like 6,000 is what I read. 6,000 child actors and amateurs, which
That's
seems
a lot
like
of kids.
a lot. It
Yeah.
seems kind of unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I
Unless
guess
there's 6,000 kids in the world, you know.
yeah. But yeah, so Mike Fenton, the casting guy, plays some ads in LA schools for some kids, and Quan actually showed up with his older brother. His older brother was auditioning, but he was giving his older brother some like notes, and they were like, "Oh, we like this kid. We like we like you." And so he was 12 years old at the time. I think he's of Chinese Vietnamese descent. And they so you know they liked him. They were like, okay, let's get you to do some auditioning. And so Spielberg liked him so much that he calls in Ford, and they do kind of like a little improv audition together, which is them playing like a card game together. And that ends up making it into the movie, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, and Ford at the time, well, in the making of documentary that you can watch, and then even like during this past award season, when you know he was getting all that attention, Ford like just is like, oh yeah, he was great. He was fun to work with. He was emotionally invested as much as anybody else, you know, on the set. So just really cool. And going back to your comment about his karate moves, he was a huge fan of Jackie Chan movies.
Oh yeah.
And so he in the making of, he was like, yeah, I was just like doing stuff I saw Jackie Chan do. And so like, what a dream to be a 12-year-old kid and be getting to like imitate your idol.
Yeah. And this was right. I'm trying to think back. You'll know better right now, but this was really the first movie where Spielberg really worked with kids, right? I mean, there's a kid that's kind of one of the main characters in Close Encounters, but he's not really in a lot of the movie. Like one big scene. There's some kids in Jaws, but they're really not in it very much.
Very little. Yeah.
So this is really the first one where a kid's like the main.
Yeah, a main character, like
yeah. And so now Spielberg is like renowned for working with children. You know.
Yeah.
Well,
this was like a good like lead up to E.T.
Yeah, to E.T. and Empire of the Sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting though. Like you can see, because I think Ke Kwan is so much fun in this movie. And I mean, people have complained about him in the past. Prior to his Everything Everywhere All at Once Renaissance, you know, people would complain about Short Round being annoying or whatever. And
I don't think he's annoying. Yeah,
I think he's tons of fun.
Yeah,
and kind of brings like good different energy to an Indiana Jones movie. It kind of it cuts a little bit of that kind of mean guy behavior, like kind of self-centered behavior that Indy's has going on. And it also gives us maybe one of the darkest moments in Spielberg's entire filmography, as well, when Indiana Jones hits him, while he's under the spell.
Yeah.
I love him there. I think he's so much fun.
Yeah, so I agree. So much fun. And apparently he went on and had somewhat of a career doing some stunt work and martial arts choreography and whatnot. So which totally makes sense, because by the time you get to Everything Everywhere, he's he's doing great
Yeah.
stunts. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah, other cast, Amrish Puri plays Mola Ram. He was a Bollywood actor that Spielberg really liked and wanted, and super busy. Like he was just I guess he was just like very prolific in Bollywood, because they adjusted their shooting schedule like to make sure he was,
Make it fit in there.
yeah, he fit. I read that he did 25 films between 1983 and 84. So
Wow.
just constant. And I think
They
he was
make-
even like
They
leaving
make a
on
lot of
weekends.
movies. They make a lot of movies in Bollywood.
They do, yeah.
They make like 3 times the amount of movies that we make in the United States, and always have.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I need to watch more Bollywood. I've seen a few here and there. One of my friends in college, and then he was my roommate for a bit, is Indian, and I would watch one with him every once in a while. And so yeah, I definitely need to catch maybe some of the more like prolific ones. I think would be fun.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Do a Bollywood series one of these times.
Oh yeah, that might be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably my favorite thing about Amrish was that he apparently, I think it was Roshan Seth said he continued to shave his head after this movie. So apparently he wasn't like a shave head guy until this movie, and was just like, I'm just gonna roll with this now. So that's fun. Speaking of Roshan Seth, he plays Chatar Lal, the prime minister kind of character. I think he calls himself the prime minister. But and he said he had like largely quit acting until he came back on to do Gandhi. And then kind of made a few more after Gandhi, including this one. And so yeah, he makes Gandhi, makes another, I can't remember the one in between, makes this one, and I'm not sure if he continued after that, but I thought he was fine. Raj Singh is the little kid that plays the Maharaja. I think he does a good little job. Does fine. This I thought was really fun. Dr. Nanayakara is how I'm gonna say it. He plays the shaman that is in the village, and he did not speak English, and so Spielberg was basically just feeding him the English lines. So Spielberg would say the line, and he would like repeat it. And so they would just go back and forth and get several takes, even to the extent that at one point, when he says darkness, Spielberg kind of did like his hand in front of his eyes, I guess, to kind of show the guy playing the shaman what he was meaning, like darkness, like you can't see. And so when he does the line, he did his hand in front of his eyes too, and that's what is in the movie. And yeah, so Michael Kahn, the editor, had to kind of piece all of that together, kind of had some built-in pauses because he's literally waiting for his line to be said. I think it really works. It
does.
It
makes
you
it mystical,
Yeah. Yeah, other interesting cast. You have Roy Chow, who plays Lao She. Dan Aykroyd is actually in it for a second. Philip Tan.
Ever noticed that before? Actually.
Yeah. I even had to go back and be like, oh yeah, okay. Because even this watch through, I was like, oh okay, I forgot. I didn't realize he was in there until I was doing research after. Yeah, Philip Tan is the henchman at the beginning. He's one of those kind of that guys. He's in a lot of stuff, and you don't realize it until you look at his filmography and you're like, oh he's that guy in all those movies. Another fun one for the indie series is Pat Roach, who kind of becomes this. He's an ex-wrestler and kind of becomes this kind of running, not joke, but kind of like kind of inside thing of like he's going to play a big character that Indy fights, maybe multiple big characters that Indy fights in every Indy movie. So he's like the chief guard that Indy does. I think he fights him in the palace, and then also in the mines too. I think they so he's twice twice here. And then the only other one is a guy named Nizwar Karanj, who plays the sacrifice victim. He had kind of like a fun little story where, Spielberg found him through, I don't know if he was like in some sort of film school or it was something like that. And he brought him in, and, he's obviously has his heart taken out, and, he didn't know, like he knew that was in the script, but obviously like they didn't actually rip his heart out. So, so he didn't actually see that until like the film, like he got to see like the premiere. So that's kind of fun to like for the first time with everyone else watch your own heart being ripped out of your chest. And he actually too came up with the idea. When they were doing that, he kind of told Spielberg, he was like, well, if this was really happening, this person would definitely be praying to Shiva. And Spielberg was like, okay, yeah, roll with that, do that. And so he kind of came up with the little like muttering a prayer that he does, which is that's a recurring thing with Spielberg. Because I heard Kate Capshaw talk about this too, is that like if you come up with an idea as the actor, Spielberg will like 9 times out of 10 let you do it, and he's going to be rolling cameras. And she was actually like, so I really had to like be careful with the ideas that I shared, because
it might end up on film.
It might end up in the film. And I better like it. Hi. Quick reminder that you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show. As far as the crew goes, you've got producer Robert Watts that I talked about a little bit already. Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall do some, executive and associate producing. Lucas and Spielberg kind of come up with the story, with Willard Hike and Gloria Katz doing the screenplay. Douglas Slocum comes back as the DP. He was the DP for Raiders too. Michael Kahn, Spielberg's tried and true editor, for basically 95% of his films. Which, I think I can't remember if I've said it before, because I kind of sometimes record these out of sequence, but I think editing is one of the most overlooked, like, important things about filmmaking, and having someone that you basically work with your whole career is like so important, I think, to the success of how your films come together. And a similar thing with John Williams, who obviously does the music here. So I think sound is a really fun part of this movie. Ben Bart does the sound effects. He's like the Star Wars guy. And so that it's fun to hear him. There's like a little I have like the Blu-ray with like the first four all in one, and there's like one disc that's just all special features. And there's one that's Blu-ray. Like, yep. I think mine's right here behind me.
It's a good set.
But yeah, so it has like the effects of Indiana Jones, the music of Indiana Jones, and there's a sound one where it's just like 10 to 15 minutes of Ben Bart like going through all the sounds that he made and how he made them, which is really fun to watch.
There's a if you ever have a chance, or if listeners, if they ever have a chance,
Mhm.
at the Academy Museum here in LA,
Yeah.
there is a one room that is devoted to sound design,
Mhm.
and they use the opening sequence of Raiders
Yeah.
as their scene, and they show you like like how they make all the little sounds, like layer them on, and then they layer them
Mhm.
on, let you see it with the sound, without the sound, with the studio sound, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's so much fun because you get to see like, oh, like that crunch is actually somebody eating an apple.
Yeah.
It's not the crunch of a thing going down, or that's a garage door opening for that
Yeah.
thing. And once you see them do it, and then you hear it, you can't like help but see the thing you saw when you hear
Yeah.
it, and it's
Yeah.
really fun. So,
Yeah.
if anyone has a chance to see it, it's a really cool part of the exhibit there.
Yeah. My favorite two sounds from Raiders is big boulder is
Uh-huh.
just he like hung out of the back of their Suburban or whatever they were in, going down
Mm-hmm.
like a gravel hill and
Yeah.
like recorded it.
Yeah.
And then I think in the Ark, when they're lifting the lid off the Ark, it's a toilet cover. Which is
That's
like,
awesome.
I guess a little bit blasphemous, I guess,
That's so funny.
but really funny.
Nah, it's magic.
Yeah, movie magic.
Yeah, it's magic.
Yeah. Elliot
Mm,
Scott was the set decorator. Is what he's credited as, which I think probably would today just be called the production designer. Um, and he does a lot of the sets like are like very much due to his like
mhm.
expertise and work.
Yeah.
Um, the special effects is Dennis Marin with George Gibbs doing like the mechanical special effects,
Mhm.
and we'll get into some of that. Um, Stunt people, Vic Armstrong is the main one.
Mhm.
Glenn Randall is another big one, but Vic Armstrong is awesome, and we'll talk about that later. And then, yeah, for the opening number, you have Danny Daniels doing the choreography, who I think had done Pennies from Heaven maybe a few years before,
Mm.
which is a pretty well-known one.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, the opening. Speaking of the opening, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
It's this Chinese version of George Gershwin and Cole Porter's Anything Goes.
Mhm.
So kind of a probably more familiar at the time than it is now
Yeah.
song, but in Mandarin. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's kind of it was I think it was Lucas's idea to open with a musical number,
Mhm.
um, and is kind of like a tribute to the Busby Berkeley
Yeah.
ballets. So
Mhm.
um, Kate Capshaw actually could sing and dance.
Mhm.
They didn't know that when they cast her, but it just kind
Huh.
of worked out.
Yeah.
So she learned to sing the song in Mandarin, and she actually also learned to tap dance. She
Huh.
learned a whole tap dance routine, and then she didn't get to do it
Huh.
because the dress that the costume designer Anthony Powell had made was very tight and very delicate.
Mm.
It was made of all these like 1920s beads and sequins and
Huh.
like really elaborate. And
Yeah.
they they actually shot this. Funny story about the dress. They shot this when they got back from Sri Lanka.
Mm.
And so they had the dress is kind of in some of the Sri Lankan scenes, including the campsite scene.
Yeah.
Um, and apparently it was draped over a branch, and in the background, the elephant started like chewing on the dress.
Oh my gosh.
And so they got back, and the dress was like all messed up. And
Mm.
uh, this is maybe my favorite, if not one of my favorite things that I found in research. So Powell had to repair it, obviously, and then when he filed the insurance claim, he had to write "dress eaten by elephant" on the insurance claim, which only making a movie do you get to write that on an insurance claim.
Yeah.
Um,
The dress thing touches on something that I was thinking about watching it. Was that it's a trope. This is a trope, right? That
Yeah.
your female lead starts out more clothed, and then as the action movie goes along,
yeah.
gets less and less clothed, like toward the end. That's a total trope in movies. I just think that's an interesting trope to notice.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will do it for laughs. I think about like speaking of Lucas, like in Attack of the Clones, like you have a moment where like Amidala, like her midriff gets ripped off, you know, like because the animal attacks her, and I always thought that was a bit of a joke, like on that trope, to like say, well, we have to do this because you have to do this in movies, kind of thing, and it really happens a lot throughout this movie. It's like a big part of what's going on there, but. Anyway, I think it's funny.
Yeah. It probably. I would say it's probably there in Raiders too, a bit with Marion. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but I think that is true. And it probably aligns with like the entire character is sort of a trope, like a stereotype.
Yeah,
like
totally.
I think in their mind for comedic effect, and we can talk about it later how that works.
Yeah.
And what the reaction was, but yeah.
I mean, it's not a bad time to start talking about it, though, like with this opening sequence, you know, with the gong hit and with the dance number,
because it is the setup.
It's still in like he, you know, when Indiana Jones like first appears here, walks out, he's like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, you know, like the whole thing is like it's this Lucas thing where like we're gonna take this genre of movie or multiple genres of movies that I liked from the past, kind of jam them together and update them, like with new special effects and new filmmaking techniques. And so like I love the way this movie starts. I mean, there, you know, is the Indiana Jones trope is to take the Paramount Mountain and then turn into something, you know.
The gong crossfade is great.
Yeah, the gong crossfade is great, and it like puts you like right. Okay, it's like okay, now we're in Powell and Pressburger. We're in Archer's mode, you know. We're in Stanley Donen musical world. We're in John Huston adventure movie world. We're in Humphrey Bogart, John Huston adventure movie world. You know, like we're in an old James Bond movie. You know, like we're in a 1960 James Bond movie too. And they give you all those things right at the beginning of the movie to kind of set your expectations for what you're going to see. Right down to here's your heroine. Here's your female lead in this movie. She's going to be a shrieking, scared damsel in distress because that's the kind of woman that is in these older movies. You know, these kind of adventure movies. And we can talk about her more later, her performance and everything, that character more later if you want to.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, like, from the get-go, you should know what kind of woman this is going to be.
Right.
You know, it's not going to be Marion.
It's like the opposite of the intro to Marion.
It is, yeah. Marion shows up and she drinks everybody under the table as the toughest person in the room. Willie is a showgirl.
Yeah.
You know?
I think Spielberg described her as, you know, a rich girl that's always had her way and is, you know, just like doing this all because she gets to do it and get applause and adoration from everyone in the room.
Yeah.
Like, you know, which is like just totally the opposite of the introduction to Marion, which is, you know, I think that's conscious. Like, I think that's a conscious choice for sure on his and Lucas's part.
Yeah. It's a different tone for the film. Yeah. I think it works. But,
and I think part of what they are doing with the Indiana Jones movies is like you've been talking about. They're just like, hey, what is something that we have always loved that like what can we puzzle piece together like of all the things that we've loved? And that's just like one aspect is that type of character. Like, hey, you know, there was all these movies that had this type of character growing up. Like, let's do that.
Like you can imagine, you don't have to squint very hard to imagine like this kind of movie, but with like someone like Marilyn Monroe in it, in that role. You know, kind of a bombshell blonde who's not the smartest person in the room. You know, can be a little bit shrieky, a little bit grossed out by everything that's going on,
Yeah.
but still has a little bit of enough to stick up for herself with Indy, but
Mhm.
mainly is just there to kind of be that ultra feminine kind of character in these weird scenarios.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And you know, the I think it's a really good opening. You mentioned like the musical like influence too is like really interesting. One of the things that I was kind of like taken aback by for half a second watching it this time was you really go into this like
fantasy world thing.
yeah fantasy dream sequence world because like
Uh,
it's a tiny stage in this little
yeah, I know.
club like there's not room for what you see on screen.
Yeah,
So it's almost like those all those old musicals you know basically played on the fact that you and they both know that this is being filmed on a studio set,
that's right. Yeah,
and kind of play into that
yeah.
almost like a metatextual like fantasy
hmm
mashup kind of thing.
Yeah.
um
It's movie. Like
yeah.
it's very movie. It can
Hmm.
only happen in a movie. You couldn't even see that on a
Yes.
stage if you were in person.
Right.
Like even the largest stage you can imagine, you couldn't do that. It's
Hmm.
movie.
Right.
So like you're not supposed to take anything. Not that it's not serious what you're watching, but you're supposed to take it in that kind of fantasy.
Hmm. It's
Once you know
not
you're watching a
real.
fantasy,
Right.
yeah, you're not supposed to judge it by the physics of the real world. You
Hmm.
know, yeah,
Or even the and we keep jumping onto this like this is a stereotype like but you're not supposed to judge it by like what's wrong or right about stereotypes in real life like
yeah,
it's supposed to just be fun.
yeah.
It's not supposed to be it's not supposed to be making any comment on what a woman
Right.
should or should not be like.
That's right.
um
Yeah. Now I will say I do feel like Lucas in particular kind of maybe goes a bit too far with that
mm,
idea sometimes.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
you look at like the Star Wars prequels and how the Trade Federation or how the Gungans are characterized and things like
Yeah.
that. Where
Hmm.
he does it here too. Like this is look at the way that all the thuggies
Yeah.
uh, and Willie and everybody like how these people are characterized. And I think he maybe has a tendency to push it a little bit too far.
Yeah.
And that is the defense he gives that these aren't racist stereotype portrayals because I'm not showing real people.
Yeah.
I'm just using bits of cultural ephemera
Hmm.
to create kinds of characters in a fantasy movie world or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that argument holds all the water in the world. You
Yeah.
know,
But also you
um,
have to you have to question that a bit when, you know, the feminist backlash when the movie releases and
I know.
also when the Indian authorities won't let you film in
Yeah,
their country. So,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. At some point, you have to have a little bit of humility,
Yeah.
and I really don't think that, uh, especially in the mid '80s, uh, Lucas and Spielberg had that much humility at
Yeah.
the time.
Oh no.
I think the reaction to this film helped Spielberg considerably learn a bit more humility. I
Hmm.
think you can see that in kind of moves he makes
Oh yeah.
after this. I'm not sure about Lucas, but
Yeah. Yeah, and back on our 1941 episode, we kind of touched a little bit on, you know, how things can get a little bit out of hand when directors have maybe a little bit too much power.
hmm
And we actually will talk about that. I'm doing kind of a little bit out of sequence. The Twilight Zone episode, we really get into that.
Yeah.
Um, which that movie came out before this. But the episode will be after because I'm lumping it in with Amazing Stories. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about, but that is definitely a factor.
Yeah.
It's a time where like like the title director
hmm
carries with it a lot of power, and sometimes that power goes a little bit too unchecked.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so this and I am realizing too, because I'm looking at my notes. So they started shooting in Kandy, in Sri Lanka, 1 week after E.T. lost the Best Picture to Gandhi. So E.T. did come out before this.
Did come before this.
We were off a little bit on our timeline there.
So he had done his kid acting before this.
Yeah, he had. Yeah. So he was coming into with Short Round with some experience working with kids. But yeah, so he gets disappointed losing to Gandhi for E.T. and then jumps right into the next thing. So
I don't know why I always think that E.T. came out in like 86. But it came
feels
out in 83.
Like it did, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. It came out in 83, and I always forget that. And something about these Spielberg movies right here in the middle of the 80s that I feel like all came out in 86. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But yeah, 83 for that one.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too because I'm like I was born in the early 90s, and E.T. typically, like, usually the movies that you're watching as a kid are like in the past 5-6 years, like they kind of have some staying power, but E.T. had a lot of staying power too because it was still really a big deal when I was a kid, when I was a young kid. I watched it as a kid, as kind of like it's one of those like rite of passage. You watch this when you're a kid sort of movies, But yeah, so they had a $28 million budget, which I think they put to pretty good use.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole Indiana Jones thing initially. Like that was why Lucas convinced Spielberg to do it.
Yeah.
It was like
after 1941. Yep.
You need to make a movie fast and cheap, and this is a movie you can make fast and cheap. And so that's always what Raiders in India has been.
Oh yeah. Yeah. As far as locations goes, we talked about Candy. They did a good bit of the exteriors in Candy, or the in the area surrounding too. The one big exterior that wasn't there was the Shanghai car chase, which they shot in Macau, which is currently, I think, an autonomous state in China. It's near Hong Kong, but at the time was actually Portuguese territory. I guess, which is why they could shoot there, even though they couldn't shoot the Chinese movie in China. I guess Macau was kind of, I think at the time, Portuguese territory, so they were able to shoot that scene there at least, which is a great little car chase scene. So they did elephant orphanage for the elephants. They've got fruit bats actually like flying around, so they captured the actual which those are fruit bats. Indiana Jones calls them vampire bats, but I think vampire bats are actually like very tiny
little things.
So the fruit bats are the big ones flying around. So which they actually, I think those are like the real sounds that they captured on location, because they captured a lot of like animal sounds, like local animal sounds when they were in Sri Lanka. Bart kind of talks about that in the sound making of, but yeah, which is fun. And then one of the other really cool things that was kind of like happenstance and saved them a lot of money was that there happened to be some British engineers working on a dam in the area, and they commissioned them to build the suspension bridge. So they like saved a ton of money not having to bring someone in to do that. They just like, these guys are here, why don't we just hire their engineers? Why don't we just hire them? And
that's kind of ironic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, filming in the place where they filmed Bridge on the River Kwai, and you get some British engineers to come in and build your suspension bridge.
That is true. I didn't even make that connection, but yeah, yes, that's
no one will do it better. I'm sure they hated watching it be torn down.
Yes, yeah, or loved it, because I mean, to be honest, if I built it and then was able to like, if they let them come and like watch them explode it, that would probably be pretty fun to watch. It's always fun to watch something explode.
True.
But yeah, so they didn't have exteriors of the palace. So the rare shots you get of like the palace exteriors, like especially like the wide shots, are some of those matte paintings. on canvases. And one thing that I came across that's kind of like a fun fact was that David Fincher worked on some of the matte paintings that were used in the movie, which I thought was like, oh, David Fincher popping up.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I knew he did matte painting work, kind of like James
Yeah.
Cameron did early in his career. But
I don't know to what extent, but
Yeah.
he probably wasn't like the main guy, but he did some work on it apparently.
Yeah.
So that's really fun. And you do get a good bit of matte painting for a lot of like the location stuff, kind of
isn't it
adding
great?
some depth
Yeah.
here and there, and
Yeah. I love it so much.
yeah,
They don't do it now. It's all digital now. But
mhm.
if I had a time machine, right? Go back in time, get a job on a movie like this, and then just take the matte paintings home with you, put them on your
Yes.
wall, right? 'Cause
Yes.
they're just incredible.
They are.
Yeah.
Man, those
Most time they weren't
Palace
saved.
ones are so good.
Oh yeah,
Um,
incredible.
yeah, so that was for like the location stuff. About 3/4 of the film was shot at Elstree Studios in London, which is like Lucas's place for Star Wars and for Raiders. So kind of going, I guess, kind of like home for Lucas at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they do, obviously the interiors and the mines, just all of that. And then also like in the lot, they do some of the outdoor stuff where they're like building little small things like the cliff side where the bridge is hanging down is kind of out in the studio lot that they built. All that kind of stuff is all at Elstree. The only other location was there's a team that went to Florida to get footage of the alligators,
Oh yeah.
which is funny because I'm pretty sure alligators are more like in the Americas, and over
Right.
there it would be crocodiles.
Crocodiles. Yeah.
So if if you're an expert on that, you would probably notice, but I couldn't tell you the strong difference between the two. So it works for me.
Yep.
One thing that happened during the production of this movie was that played probably a big part in how the movie ends up is Harrison Ford got some herniated discs in his back during the making of this. He traces it back to riding on the elephants. He was like, those riding on those things really like jacked my back up. And then by the time he's fighting a guard and getting tossed over his back, it was like unbearable. I think Spielberg or somebody said like he like screamed like when the guard like threw him over his back, and so they ended up sending him back home to LA. They kind of halted production for a minute, sent him home. He was actually there for 6 weeks. He had some sort of like new surgery done, and that was successful, and rehabilitated, and it took him 6 weeks before he could come back. And so Spielberg, being Spielberg and having learned how to be efficient, did not stop. He used about a week to kind of rework some of the dialogue with John Milius, apparently.
Oh, that's funny. That's really funny. When I was watching the film again, I thought at one point, I remember when it was. I think it was during one of the fights in the mines or something. I thought, man, they really spent too much time hanging out with John Milius.
Spielberg definitely did.
I don't know how familiar you are with John Milius. Are you familiar with him and his films and his work?
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah.
I talked a lot about him on 1941 episode.
Yeah, that for sure. But like, he's a really interesting guy, and like very important for like that whole era of filmmaking. But he's such a macho dude, but like a fake macho dude, like a guy who's not macho but wishes he was, kind of, and like is really into, like, he would have a YouTube channel now. Like if he was around now, he would have a YouTube channel and he would be hawking supplements. That's who he would be. And there's times where like it really helps to have John Milius on your project, and the other time like, well, that's just a little bit too much. Because it always kind of like drifts into like chauvinism and misogyny and stuff like eventually. And this movie just does that a little too much.
Yeah.
That's funny that he actually worked on it a little bit. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. He doesn't have any credits, but definitely had a little bit of influence there.
Yeah.
But with the remaining 5 weeks, Spielberg was just like, well, we're just gonna keep shooting. So they shoot a lot of stuff without Ford there. They did the meal scene is done without Ford there.
You can feel that.
Yeah,
He's kind of having his own little story going on while everybody else is getting grossed out.
Yep. They did that. They did the whole like conveyor belt sequence, and a lot of like the mine car sequence without Ford. And that's where Vic Armstrong comes in, who he has basically like the same body type as Ford.
Yeah.
Looks a lot like him. Maybe not in the face, but like his body type.
Yeah.
And Vic Armstrong was basically Indy for a large portion of the film. He's the main stunt guy. He's actually like not just a stunt man. He's like the stunt coordinator for the movie. And so yeah, he does. Him and Spielberg kind of like almost improv like the whole conveyor belt sequence. They kind of come up with it as they're making it.
As you're doing it,
and it's like one of the like best little sequences in the whole film. So
for sure.
It's like classic like villain. Villain runs off and leaves you to like fight his minions and slowly moving towards something that's going to kill you, kind of thing. It plays really well, and so I think so basically he just shoots for 5 weeks without Harrison Ford, which is really cool.
For sure.
That they were able to do that. They basically just got some insert shots when Ford returned and edited in so that he made sure like you could see Indy's face here and there with those insert shots so that there was continuity. But
smart.
Yeah, very smart. Very, very smart. And I think that too plays into maybe the way the film is edited at some point, like especially in those action sequences, there's very like frenetic editing.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
I think it's probably because like, oh, we had to cut here because then you can see Vic Armstrong's face, or I think there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, that's true. It does. It contributes to the overall like heavier, like more somber is wrong, but like heavier. People say darker, like kind of tone. There's less humor. There's less like quintessential Spielberg visual editing humor in this film than in his other movies, even his other action-oriented movies. Like you get fewer shots, like in Jurassic Park when the T-Rex is chasing him and he catches that like objects in mirror closer than they appear, kind of thing. Like little visual gags like that are like all throughout Spielberg's career, and there's less of them, fewer of them in this movie. Maybe because of this, because they had cut around.
It could be because it's when something like this happens, like in post-production, I mean they're editing on film at this point, and you've got to go through all that and kind of work with what you've got. And I think that did play a lot into what they ended up with for sure. We can talk too a little bit about Kate Capshaw. She one of the things I thought was funny was in the making of, she said, I didn't read the script too well because there were several reasons. She didn't know how to scream, and there's a lot of screaming.
Indeed.
She even like reiterates in several spots, like I told them there was too much screaming. Like when the reception comes out and they're like, everyone hates the character. She's like, I tried to tell them there was too much screaming. But like Spielberg, there's a funny little thing in the making of where she's like, yeah, Spielberg taught me how to scream, and it cuts to like on set, and Spielberg's like, here's how you do it, and he goes like, which if you're listening, you didn't miss anything. I actually just opened my mouth and didn't make any noise. And then Spielberg goes, and then they'll add it in post, like, well, they'll add in the scream in post. I thought that was funny. So I don't know how much of the screaming is actually Kate Capshaw or just like someone else screaming, but I think it was probably her. But
It sounds like her.
yeah, it is. I think it's her, but they might have done some like ADR for her
ADR stuff.
screams. Yeah.
Yeah. She
Um,
does scream a lot.
she
That's true.
She does.
She
And
screams a lot. She whines a lot.
yes,
Complains a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
That's
basically
kind
her
of the whole
character.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, she punches a few people here and there, and
Mhm.
she
She had,
but even
she's
when
had
she's
enough at
punching,
some points.
she does. Yeah. Even when she's punching somebody though, or hanging from a bridge, she's complaining about it the entire
Right.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which as, it's again, it fits the type of character that she is.
Yeah.
Like in who she's supposed to be. This kind of person, but there's definitely a lot of it.
And I think that's another thing though. So like when you're making a movie, you're like doing these, like shooting these scenes, and you're only focusing on what you're shooting in the moment. So
Mhm.
like in the moment, like a lot of these probably like were really fun and funny to shoot. Like, and you're like, oh, this is great. This is really funny. But then like when you edit the movie together and it's just like back to back to back to back, it's just like, oh, wait a second, that was maybe too much. And now that I'm watching it, I'm just now realizing like, oh yeah, there is too much screaming. Oh yeah, there is too much whining.
Mhm.
But when you're making it, it may not feel that way. So.
Yeah, maybe not. It's also, people have long criticized Raiders 2 as being a theme park ride.
Yep.
And like one of the like perpetual criticisms is that these movies gave birth to the theme park ride blockbuster.
Sure.
And I mean that's not a completely unfounded criticism of these films. It's really not a unfounded criticism of Temple of Doom, which has like theme park ride sequences.
Yes.
Where they're like riding the minecarts, stuff like that. It's like
which
they
literally recorded riding roller coasters in Disneyland after hours to get the sounds for that.
That's awesome. It's awesome. But it's like, what do you do on a roller coaster? You scream.
Right.
I mean, that's all you do.
Yeah.
But I think the difference would be you want the audience to be screaming, not the characters. Like that's probably kind of your goal with these kind of things. But it is a theme park ride. I mean, that's how it's put together. One exciting sequence after another, carry you through.
Yes. Yeah, and the one of the things that she does appreciate was that she was deathly afraid of snakes, and there was supposed to be an entire sequence of her with some snakes of some sort.
Indiana Jones does hate snakes,
yes,
so that would make sense.
And Kate Capshaw apparently was deathly afraid. They tried to like friendly introduce her to the snakes, and she had like a little like anxious breakdown, and so Spielberg had some empathy, and he like cut that entire sequence out of the movie,
nice.
Which was very nice. In fact, in the making of, he said she probably married me for that, which I thought was funny. But he did. But when he took the sequence out, he's like, "I'm taking the sequence out. You don't have to do it." He said, "But you do have to do the bugs." And she said, "And I didn't know there were going to be bugs either." And so she did do the bugs. But there is the scene.
Awesome bugs. Those are awesome bugs.
Yeah, they got some really cool bugs.
Those are some good bugs.
Yeah. I think
the living ones, not the dead ones. The living ones.
Yeah, I think the big one, like the big one that's like on his hand or shoulder at some point, is like I think it's called a Malaysian leaf bug or something like that.
Awesome.
It's like so totally harmless, but like looks so freaky.
Yeah, and there's that one like millipede centipede thing that like crawls up into her hair.
Yes, those are dangerous. So that must have been like a mannequin or something, because I don't think they would.
I don't know. It moves. It crawls right into her hair. I don't know how they faked that.
Maybe they did actually do it.
I love it.
But
yeah.
But I think those millipedes actually are like they do pack a punch with a bite or something.
Yeah. It was a defanged one or something.
Maybe.
I love that. I love that sequence. That's maybe my favorite sequence in the movie is the chamber with the spikes.
Yes.
Chamber with the spikes and all the kind of what leads up to that, like their kind of like screwball comedy like dialogue thing going on.
Then when they get fortune cookies. I love that line.
Oh, it's so fun. And then maybe the best moment in the whole movie for me is when Harrison Ford or Indy like looks through the hole and he says, "We are going to die." And he like makes this sad face. The little sad face he makes is
through
the
the little
best.
hole.
Yeah, through the little hole. It's the best.
Yeah.
We are going to die. He makes this sad. So this little sad face he does is the absolute best. I love that whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's like so like if you're a kid like making up an Indiana Jones story, like the chamber with the spikes that's going to crush you, like that's just a thing you would naturally do. You know?
Yeah. And that was actually Spielberg's favorite thing in the whole movie too.
Oh, good. So he has good taste.
Yeah. So you're kindred spirits with Spielberg. There.
Oh, it's the best. So much fun.
Yeah. He said it was his favorite to like shoot, but it was also like his favorite like to edit together.
Oh yeah.
Because you've got kind of like the it's all solved, and then like she hits the button again, and then you start everything back over. So, and that's even probably like one of the biggest like homages in the whole thing to the kind of Republic serials that they're basing these off of, is that sort of sequence.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And Gibbs, the mechanical special effects designer, he had to like, he was talking about how hard it was to get those spikes to sync up right.
Oh yeah, I bet.
But yeah. And I also love like a good example of like a Spielberg insert shot where like the spike comes up and like lifts the skull up. It's like, such a good little like insert.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It also always reminds me of the trash compactor scene in Star Wars. But instead of you have C-3PO, instead of Willie, and people like begging. It's like I just love that. I love that kind of mirror thing going on too with Lucas and Spielberg.
Yeah,
have very similar scenes there.
Yeah,
super fun.
My favorite thing about that whole thing is like the very last thing you see is him like reaching back through under the door as it's closing to grab his hat.
Always like that hat.
Yeah,
yep.
Love it.
Yeah.
When I saw him do it, I was like, yes, like get the hat. You get the hat, Indy.
Yeah, that's Indy trope right there. Always grab that hat.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the other production stuff. Obviously, Elliot Scott, as I said, is the hero of the set design here, building all these interiors, the temple, the palace, the mines, like just incredible stuff. And
sorry, I'm just still thinking about Harrison Ford's face when he gets sad in the hole. Sorry, it's just one of the best things. Sorry, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. If I remember when I'm mixing this together, I'll have to pull that image and edit it into the YouTube clip. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, him and Scott and Doug Slocum, who was the DP, actually worked like a ton together, because the lighting in some of these, when you're doing these big, huge, gigantic sets, sometimes it's like hard to like get the lighting right, and so they worked kind of in tandem where, like, for instance, like in the like Kali temple that's down underground, Scott built like holes in the set that were for the lighting. So I guess him and Slocum kind of figured out, okay, here's where we need lights. So when they were building the set, they kind of built the space in for the lighting into it. So when I was hearing Slocum talk about that, I was like, oh, okay, that explains why the lighting in this movie is just like phenomenal.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All the reds and all the like.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
It's great.
I mean, it's gorgeous and scary, but it's like, so it's so like a comic book come to life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and the Mola Ram character with the like little helmet hat thing he has is just like, oh yeah, like super villain almost, like kind of feel
Darth
to
Maul.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They also another random production design thing, they built that village in Sri Lanka. So the little village where all the people are, they like built all of that. It's made to look bigger than it is, obviously, but still really, really good production design there.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they would have to build the stuff when they're like into the village and it's like kind of close up shots. There's one shot toward the end when they first come over the hill to come back into the village that looks very matted in.
It is. It's a matte painting. Yeah.
Yeah. It looks matted in. That one does.
Yeah.
But,
Still looks
well,
good
the
though.
matte paintings. So it looks good. Yeah.
Yep. The more productive. We did already talk about the bugs. There was apparently like 20,000 bugs or something.
That's awesome.
Frank Marshall called the little boxes like a bug hotel, which is really funny. I'm kind of spitballing random things about the bugs. Kate Capshaw took a relaxant on the day of the shooting of the bugs, and she says she came in, she was like, yeah, she was like very like relaxed about the whole thing,
Oh, that's fun.
which is great. As they're just like dumping boxes of bugs on her head. Um, and the other funny thing about the bugs, which obviously are like very hard to work with because they're bugs. You
Yeah, they don't really take direction very
can't
easy.
train them.
Yeah.
But
Spielberg great with kids, not so great with bugs.
Yeah. Spielberg said by the last day they were shooting, they only had like 25% of their bugs left. I guess the bugs were all in the ecosystem around Elstree Studios now. So that's great. The other like kind of gross out thing is the meal that they do. Which they were just kind of having fun with. When you hear like Lucas and Spielberg and even like the writers Willard and Gloria talk about it, they were just kind of like having fun. They had like I don't get I really like believe them. Like I don't get the feel that they were like doing anything like insidious or like trying to make fun of Indian culture at all.
Yeah.
They were just they were kind of like tongue in cheek playing on the idea of like when you go somewhere and like there's food that you don't recognize, and really like even further than that, like Lucas was even trying to do like a 30s goofy comedy humor thing, like Abbott Costello, like like gross out comedy.
I can kind of see the bones of that in there.
Yeah.
The exoskeleton is that in there. So.
Yeah. the very bare bones.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's they're just kind of, I don't know, like it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, maybe your intentions were fine, but they're still like
the effect is what it is.
Yeah, the effect is what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, it kind of gets into a little bit of that scene is I should probably be thinking it before then. But I always think in that scene, I'm like, this movie's kind of mean.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of sadistic and kind of mean. Like I think part of it is because like Indiana Jones is so oblivious to what's going on.
Yeah.
Because he's like engaged in the conversation with the Prime Minister,
Yes.
Meanwhile, Willie and Short Round are being basically tortured
with food.
by the food, and it's just like it's a little bit sadistic. Ends up feeling a little bit sadistic, and like I get the humor of it. It is funny, and it is like it's like when I used to chase around my sisters with grasshoppers,
right?
Like,
and this is Spielberg like
thing to do.
terrorizing his little sisters when he was growing up. It's basically what this is.
Yeah, it's very juvenile. I get that or whatever, and so I always puzzle. I'm like, why does this feel so mean? I mean, I guess it was mean when I terrorized my sisters.
Yeah,
but it's also like I think it's because Indiana Jones is not part of it.
Maybe, and that goes back to him not being there.
That's right. Filming it a disc, right, and had to cut it up a little bit. So it wasn't like it wasn't mean intent,
right?
But it was mean in practice, or something.
Yeah, the final product. And it's another example too of like I was saying earlier, like when you're making it, it's just kind of fun. Like, I mean, you're playing with rubber bugs with custard in them, and like the monkey brains were just like custard and raspberry. And I think even like they had to like do a bunch of takes of her stirring the soup because she had to get it just right so that both of them would pop up. They were like glued to the bottom. And so like when you're making it, it's just fun. Like, how it comes out like in the edit might be totally different, different than like just the kind of fun you're having with rubber bugs and stuff while you're making it,
It's also, I think, because there's so much of it, And because it's not if it was the only scene in the movie like that, it probably wouldn't stand out as much,
Mhm.
But the fact that the movie gets so dark,
Yeah.
and so like seriously mean,
Mhm.
like Indiana Jones hitting a kid,
Yeah.
and stuff like that,
And kids
It
being
gets like
whipped in the mines.
kids being whipped, yeah, like Short Round being whipped. Your kid hero is being whipped at one
Mhm.
point. And being whipped, which the whip is like an important part of who Indiana Jones is.
Yeah.
So it's like you're using an icon, that's part of your heroes,
Mhm.
part of who your hero is, and turning it into a device that's hurting your hero and hurting the kid. And
Yeah.
so like the movie gets so mean. I think if the only mean scene was the bugs, you would just think, oh, that was goofy,
Yeah.
you know. But it's like that on top of everything else kind of becomes a lot of meanness.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And to be clear, I don't hate the meanness. We'll talk about that.
Mm.
But it is I think meanness, mean in
Yes.
effect. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
if not in intent. No.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, jumping back to like more production stuff. One thing I thought was really cool was they made like half-size models for the sacrifices, for the pit
Mm,
sacrifices,
yeah,
so that they could, lower them down and stuff. That was
that's cool.
fun. And obviously,
Yeah,
like you still have to get shots of them like actually like reacting and sweating and stuff.
screaming and stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, the more wide shots are just like little half-size models, which is fun.
Mm.
Um, the mine the mine chase is probably like the most like impressive
Oh
thing
yeah.
they did, because it's like a combination of several different like production works. So you have like the
Mm.
full size, which is like not very long. It's like
Right.
it's just like a short little like set that they built, and they just like
Mm-hmm.
would change the lighting and change some things here and there to make it look like you're seeing different parts of the mine
The
tunnel,
mine. Yeah.
um, which that's impressive because it plays.
Oh yeah.
You never
Mm-hmm.
think like, oh, I'm going through the same tunnel over and over.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's a combo of that, and then also like some miniature work.
Mm-hmm.
So there's both like, so like they figured out a way to like mount the actual camera onto like a little cart that was going behind the
Huh.
other miniature cart, and so they
Huh.
got it basically by doing that. They got it small enough where they could save a lot of money, and they just used tinfoil
Hmm.
to build the tunnels. So you can
Huh.
kind of crinkle up tinfoil and color it,
Yeah. Make it look
and
like a rock wall.
yeah, and
Yeah.
light it so it looks like you're in a
Huh.
cave tunnel. And so yeah, the Scott was like, yeah, we're able to make those tunnels for $1.98,
Huh. That's cool.
so which once you do all the work and add paint and stuff, it's more than that, but
Sure.
funny joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and then the camera mounted, they were basically like when you watch them actually like doing it, it's like moving at like a snail pace.
Of
And it
course.
was shot
Yeah.
at like 1 frame per second and then sped up,
Mm.
obviously. Um, and
Hmm.
so, and then like there's a few times where you have to have character movement. And so they put little models in and did stop motion for those.
Huh.
Um, so
Oh,
there's a little
cool.
bit of stop motion in Temple of Doom
Yeah.
too. So it's just like a huge combination of so
Yeah.
many different like production and effects works to make
Yeah.
that mind sequence happen.
Hmm.
Um, which
That's really cool.
yeah, I loved
I love
watching all
that
that
about.
stuff.
Yeah, I love that about early '80s movies.
Hmm.
That it's the best special effects work that's ever been done. The
Yeah.
best practical special effects work that's ever been done.
Hmm.
Because there's like a thing where like with any kind of technology in filmmaking, like up to the point where the new technology thing comes in, like that moment before the new thing comes in,
Hmm.
you have the most experience and skill that you ever
Yes.
have
Yeah.
in a technique, and then the new thing comes in and it kind of messes things
Kind of
around for
sets
a
you
while.
back.
Yeah,
I
you have to learn how
remember.
to do the new stuff.
Yeah, I did like a small group with some people at my church, kind of going through some films through history,
Mm-hmm.
and we started with Sunrise,
Yeah.
Song of Two Humans, and one of the things that we talked about was like how at that point, I mean, it was like the peak of silent filmmaking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like the amount of like incredible like innovative camera work and stuff that you see in Sunrise, and even like the editing and like
Yeah.
is just like really incredible. And then talkies, like the first talkie came out like a week after Sunrise released, and
Yeah.
so it ends up like kind of setting the whole industry back.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yep.
and got to work back up to that
Yeah.
level. And
Yep.
yeah.
And you always have like a couple of artists who like stick to their thing,
Mm-hmm.
and keep advancing and
Yep.
keep developing. So like you still have your Charlie Chaplins who's making movies like City Lights in 1941,
Right.
like a
Mm-hmm.
full 14 years later.
Yeah.
So he kept advancing his silent film
Mm-hmm.
thing, and he was best there ever was. So,
Yeah.
you can't, and we still have that with practical effects. There's still practical effect filmmakers, people like like James Cameron,
and Nolan.
And Nolan, yeah, totally. Who like, even though like they still embrace the digital and like know how to use it. Like you think of something like Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing a whole thing on James Cameron right now. When we talk about writing and stuff later, but like you think about like James Cameron, like he was like super practical guy, but has always like tried to like embrace the digital and like move that into his filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
But so much of what he does is still practical.
Yeah.
Even Avatar, which is like you can't imagine a more big wash of digital effects on top of something.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is also practical. Like they have to make all the clothing, all the jewelry. They have to shoot those actual people riding things around, going underwater, all that kind of stuff. Like there's still a huge practical element to what's going on. And so even when the new thing comes in, there are still practitioners who keep pushing the old thing forward.
Yep.
It's just not the dominant thing anymore.
Right.
And so like what's fun about a movie like Temple of Doom, which is, a $28 million sequel to a movie everybody loved.
Yeah.
That wasn't even the film itself, they were making it cheap and fast. Still has incredible special effects.
Yeah.
Because it was still like the thing the industry was doing.
And really like you said, like it's like at the peak of
it's the peak.
Of all those visual effects. And I even wrote in my notes that it's like a true model of the power of what you can do in a movie with practical effects. Before, and kind of like on the cusp of like computer generated effects starting to take over the industry.
Totally.
Yeah.
Actually, Indiana Jones, young Indiana Jones was one of the first like fully CG characters. There's a fight he has with a stained glass knight. Young Indiana Jones.
I remember that
episode, and that's one of the first fully CG characters that another character interacts with in anything. So Indy's even part of it.
Yeah.
as it changes.
Yeah. I was which I don't know. I think I mentioned it briefly in when we talk about amazing stories, but like I watched like the Twilight Zone movie, and you've got the Twilight Zone intro, and it's like really fun and cool and like stuff floating around in space, like kind of like practical effects kind of looking thing. And then you go to Amazing Stories, and it's like half of the intro sequence to Amazing Stories is like CGI stuff, and it just like looks really bad.
Yeah.
It's like a similar thing, like stuff floating around and moving, just like Twilight Zone intro, but it looks like it looks terrible. Like and it's just
I misspoke a moment ago. It's not young Indiana Jones, it's young Sherlock Holmes.
That's right.
That fights this stained glass knight.
Yes. It's now that you say that, because I did read that in something I was doing for research of this. So when you said the first thing, I made the connection to that, but didn't realize it was the wrong thing. But good catch. So as far as like the effects goes, we've got to hit on some of these things. So you have stuntman Vic Armstrong doing a lot of the work. He had actually invented something called the fan descender, which is still used some, I think. He had invented it for past movies, I think.
Hmm.
And it's basically what they use when they do the falling through the canopies out of the
Uh-huh.
window at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's something that I guess like helps you to fall and not fall to your death, I guess. And so yeah, I loved that. And his wife Wendy actually does a lot of the stunt double work for Kate Capshaw. So that's fun. Kind of got a stunt double married
Yeah.
couple, which is really great. And that too, another cool thing that kind of descent through the canopies is like we've kind of talked about Chaplin and Keaton, but that's a callback to a stunt Keaton did in his first feature film, Three Ages. So that was all the way back in 1923, I think.
Yeah.
And then also Jackie Chan did that stunt in Project A, which had come out, I think, the year before this released. So yeah, so that I guess that stunt was coming back in style, and
Yeah.
they're hopping on that train.
Well, I kept thinking about, Aladdin does that. Animated film. But Aladdin does that.
Yeah.
There's also
in India, which that was actually in Shanghai, I think, but still.
There's also I don't know why I kept thinking about the animated Disney film Aladdin as I was watching this movie, but I did because there's the thing with the sword, and like he has a sword, he's like, I got a sword, and then they like all have swords, and it just reminded me of Abu with the sword, and you idiot, we've all got swords. They didn't say that in this movie, but I feel that in that moment, kind of thing.
That's great.
I don't know. Minecart too, like feels like the magic carpet getting out of Cave of Wonders.
Oh yeah,
I don't know, there's all these things, but that does, I guess that does connect back though to the kind of movie it is though, because Aladdin, the animated film, is also that kind of movie. It's a Powell and Pressburger, like it's a 1940s serial, like kind of adventure story. In the same way that this is doing the same kind of thing. So you end up with the same kind of visual, action gags, tropes, all that kind of stuff.
Playing. I guess Aladdin's, playing on those Arabian Nights stories. It's like a mishmash. It kind of makes like a full story out of a mishmash of all of those that used to be kind of just played separately stories. So
yeah, totally. Well, and you go back talking about great movies. If you go back and the movie that first used was blue screen at the time. Is a Michael Powell film, and it's late at night, and I'm forgetting the name of the movie right this minute. But it's an Aladdin story, and it is gonna be.
I know what you're talking about.
It's
not coming to me either.
Right here in the table of contents for the book. Not right there.
Yeah, because I'm picturing stuff.
The Thief of Baghdad.
The Thief of Baghdad. Yep.
Yeah, which was directed by Michael Powell. So we have the archer's gong thing happening at the beginning of this one, and then that kind of movie. With those kind of, and because the Disney Aladdin movie rips off Thief of Baghdad left and right.
Oh yeah.
It's the same story. And does the same kind of thing. So see, we're working in the same world. That's the kind of movie Temple of Doom is trying to be.
Yeah.
And also, Indiana Jones hits a kid, and people's hearts are ripped out, and they go to hell. So also that's going on. We'll get there.
Speaking of the heart ripping out, another great visual effect.
What a great effect. That's amazing.
David Sasala was a visual effects artist with ILM, which was Lucas's kind of effects studio. So Spielberg brings on Sasala, tells him what he wants to do, and he spends 3 weeks making a latex foam torso, which he didn't actually even see Karanj. Steven just brought him some I guess some film stock, some edits that they had put together of the guy, and he just kind of made this torso based off of what he saw on these edits Spielberg brought him, which is impressive.
So cool.
But yeah, it makes this latex foam torso, matches the actor. The makeup added the skin and the hair to it. And then they build this. He builds this like mechanism in it, which has the skin like pulled back when the hand goes in, and then like come back together, looking like it's like healed.
Yeah,
When the hand comes out.
it's amazing.
Yeah, and then it's actually just another ILM effects artist that his hand that goes in, and that's what you see in the movie. So it's not Mola Ram's hand, actually. It's this random guy that works at ILM who ended up in the movie, the hand going into the chest. Yeah, movie magic for sure.
Yeah.
And no blood. Spielberg was like, no blood, please. I know it's a heart coming out of a chest, but no excess. I guess there's like maybe blood on the makeup of the heart.
Yeah.
But there's not like blood that spills out or anything like
Gushing
that.
out of the body.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a really that's like a prime example of like practical special effects, like at its height.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah.
Because it looks like he's
Very
sticking
real.
his hand in this guy's chest.
Very, very real.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which plays into that might play into the meanness a good bit too. Which we'll
Very
definitely
real.
talk about some imagery going on there. But
yeah.
The other big effects thing was the blowing the bridge up, which is just like prime example of Spielberg big action set piece like magic. They put like 14 battery operated mannequins that would flail when they were falling on the bridge. There was like a line going through them so that when the bridge exploded, the line would obviously like pull out and like set the switch off so that they all started like flailing
around.
Yeah. And then obviously like it's a one take thing, so they've got like 8 camera angles and yeah. I always like watching making of that stuff because it's like a party. Everyone's like so giddy and excited, and then when it goes off and like it's like a one take, like this is your only chance. And they get it. Everyone's like so happy and cheering, and it's fun to watch stuff like that on movie sets behind the scenes. So yeah. And the other funny thing about the bridge is both Spielberg and the Steadicam operator, Garrett Brown, were scared of heights, and so they would only go like 1/3 out onto the bridge and not any further. And so that's why like in the movie you never have like a shot from the middle of the bridge. It's always from like one side or the other kind of. Which and reading that in hindsight, I was like, oh, that makes sense. You wouldn't think about it in the movie. It looks fine, but one thing about the camera movement that I noticed in this was there's a ton of like just like constant camera movement. Like he doesn't leave the camera still a lot in this movie, which is something that I know that Scorsese does. In his movies, there's even like when you're on a character like in dialogue, Scorsese a lot of times will be like doing a slow zoom or something like that. And I noticed Spielberg doing, I know they were friends, or at least acquaintances. And I don't know if there was, I kind of doubt there was any influence there.
Right.
But it's just kind of a connection I made, like, oh, this is a lot of there's a lot of like moving up onto the characters' faces instead of just like doing a straight cut to their faces. And there's a lot of like crane movements of like moving up and in closer to people in a way. A lot of the zooms are like more practical zooms, like where the camera is actually moving instead of just like zooming in using the lens. Just like, and I think that just plays into a lot of like how energetic this movie, like it feels nonstop. And I think
it really does.
I think one reason is because of that, all of that camera movement. There's hardly ever still moments, and I think that's why when there are those like still shots of the matte paintings and stuff, that's why it's kind of like like you get to have like a sigh of relief for like half a second.
Yeah,
and watch
that's
some
true.
elephants walk across a field.
Yeah, that's true. It really doesn't stop moving.
Yeah,
Maybe to its detriment. I mean, it's
I think so.
yeah, it's
And
kind of, it can be kind of exhausting.
yeah,
Kind of exhausting film because of that
yeah,
constant one thing to another, and the action scenes go on for a long time.
they do, and that's one of my
Um,
big quibbles with the
yeah,
movie. That I think that's one of the. I was very tired.
yeah,
Like not obviously not physically, but like I I noted in my notes when I was watching the movie, I was like, relentless action. Like
yeah,
I was kind of like I needed a break, and I think that's
yeah.
one thing Raiders did really well was
Mm-hmm.
you would have like a huge action sequence, and then you would
And a
have a
little
break.
break.
You would
Yep.
have some dialogue, you would have some exposition, you would have
Mm-hmm.
some character building, and then boom, jump right back into it. But then you've had
Yep.
time to like take a breath, and
Yeah.
especially like the last 30 to 45 minutes of this movie, by the time like you get to the end, I was like, man, I was like, I was ready for a break 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. It's like from the moment like Indy gets captured to
Hmm.
the end, it like pretty much never stops.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
much never stops.
I think
Yeah.
that's a problem with the
Yeah.
ending of this movie. And it's the reason I think I don't like it as much as I
Mm.
might have otherwise.
Yeah.
It's because like I can't enjoy the awesome action that's going on as much because it's just like it doesn't give me a chance to like
Yeah.
take something in.
Yeah. Yeah. There's and and you a lot of that can kind of stand in for what's essentially a very simple story.
It
You
is, yeah.
know,
Hmm.
a very simple story and very almost non-existent character arcs.
Hmm.
Like we can say there's a character arc there for Indy, but it's barely there.
Yeah.
It's barely there. And there's really no arc for Willie, or for Short Round. They
Yeah.
don't have anything really going on. They're just kind of along for the ride.
Hmm.
And so all the action kind of like a lot of butter on popcorn.
Oh yeah.
Like just kind of like cover over all the lack of anything else there. What it reminded me of, watching it again this time, is it reminded me of Return of the Jedi.
Hmm.
Return of the Jedi is kind of like that too. Like I watched that movie now, and I feel like, oh, this is the same structure of like every blockbuster Return of the Jedi is.
Mm.
It's a big opening sequence that has almost nothing to do with the rest of the movie. The Jabba the Hutt stuff has almost nothing to do with the rest of the movie. You go straight from there to there's like one little clip of Luke and Dagobah, one little clip of them talking about we're going to go blow up the Death Star again,
Hmm.
and then we're going onto Endor, and it pretty much like, it slows down a couple of moments. Like you have a little story with the Ewoks, you have Luke talking to we're not going to about Star Wars on this, but it's kind of the same thing. And then it's just like a big fight to the end.
Yeah.
With everything.
Yeah.
And it just goes straight on through.
Mm.
This is worse than that. Like this is even less.
Yeah.
There's like hardly any little dialogue scenes, or if there is a dialogue scene, you have people being grossed out by bugs alongside it.
Yeah.
It's kind of relentless, kind of impressively relentless.
Yeah.
But relentless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's. I guess there is some sort of like you can find some silver lining of something good to say is that like they do know how to like keep the action going.
They do. Yeah. Keep it interesting. For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another amazing thing about this movie, I think, is the score, which I think, Williams really like genuinely does love working with both Spielberg and Lucas.
Yeah.
He always, when you watch interviews, he's like, oh yeah, especially Spielberg, he's like very musically minded, and so he loves working with them. And he talked about too how like he noticed jumping into this second movie, he was like, I noticed much like with Star Wars when I was doing the next ones, it was kind of like riding a bike. Like I was able to just like jump back in and like start moving on the music, which I thought was a cool little thing. But he really enjoyed making those darker themes for this movie. Like you get to use the deep male choruses and the like constant drum beat to play on like the anxiety of the audience, and I think it works really well.
Yeah, it's fun.
You know, one thing I noted is like, so when they're going, they've gotten through the spikes and they're kind of about to discover the the ritual, the first sacrifice going on. You start to hear like the drum beat and the chorus before you ever see anything, and it's like John Williams kind of cueing you in. It's like, get ready, like get ready for what you're about to see, and it's just like
true.
it's just like really well timed and placed music. And so yeah, I love the score for this. Spielberg said his favorite parts of the score were like the Trek music. So like when the elephants are like when they're doing like any sort of traveling and trekking in the movie, those are his favorite parts of the score, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, I did write down a fun reference. So the Paramount gong crossfade, not the Paramount logo itself, but the gong is like a nod to Gunga Din, which was a somewhat of an influence on this from 1939. They kind of also played on the Thuggy cult in that movie. And then I already mentioned the Keaton stunt, but also the Chinese cabaret is called Obi-Wan Club. So you've always got to get a Star Wars reference in.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Spielberg, I guess Spielberg's working on 3 in a row. If you don't count Twilight Zone movie, 3 in a row Star Wars references, because you got it in Raiders, you've got it in E.T., and now again Temple of Doom. So but yeah, so you've got a lot of craziness with the production of this, especially with Ford being out for 6 weeks, and they still were only like 1 week delayed on finishing it. So I bet the studio was pretty happy with that, with the context of Harrison Ford being out for 6 weeks.
Sure.
So, but yeah, so this was released May of 1984. I had written down a worldwide box office that I had seen in a book, which I thought was 333 million. But when I looked on Box Office Mojo, it was like 100 million less than that. So I wasn't sure which number was right. Somewhere between like 270 and 333 million is the worldwide box office, which is really good return on a $28 million budget. Yeah, the reception of this, which we've talked a little bit around that, but so some critics, it had mixed ratings at the time, and I think it leans toward like mid to bad reviews critically. I think audiences still enjoyed it for the most part, but critically this was like 1941 got ripped apart critically. And then, but then he makes E.T. and he makes, Raiders and E.T. Like everyone loves those movies. Like hardly anyone has anything bad to say about those. Twilight Zone throws a wrench in everything, and then this one is kind of mixed. But yeah, Richard Corliss in Time magazine, I really thought this was a good quote. He said, it is brilliance racing down narrow tracks. And then he went on to say, you can't blame a theme park for not being a cathedral, which goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Like some people critique it for being a theme park, but other people are like, well, if that's what it is, like that's what it is. And you can't expect it to be something else, which I think is a really good point. But some people did not go for this spectacle. Vincent Canby, who I think at the time, I've quoted some of his stuff before. I think he was with like the Times or the New York Times or something with Time in it. But he wrote that it was exuberantly tasteless and entertaining. But yeah, there was obviously people deploring the portrayal of the Indian stereotypes, and also like the kind of female stereotypes with Willie Scott. of which Kate was like surprised by the reaction to Willie. She, for one, like people started like blaming her for for the result, and she was like, she had said she didn't feel attacked, but she felt like people were like calling her out, and she like didn't like that because she was a well-educated woman, a single mother, and like very much a feminist, and she was like, like I don't get why people are taking this character so seriously. She talks about, having a good time doing the character. But yeah, she got a bit blasted for that character at the time. But yeah, despite all of that, it was still a pretty big success. I would say making that much money is pretty great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't get around to looking up if it won any awards, but usually my resources will tell me if it did. Let's see. No, it did. It won, which I'm surprised it didn't say it in my Spielberg All the Films book that I have up here above my head. Usually it tells me the awards it won, but it didn't for this one. It won for visual effects and score. No, it was a nominee for score in '85, but it won visual effects, which I think is very deserving. I would think. I mean, I don't know what else was nominated for visual effects in '85, but we talked through how this was like a prime example of what you can do with effects. So
yeah,
but yeah, going to Dennis Muren and George Gibbs and all those guys, very deserving, I think. But yeah, so that's the production and release of it. It's
I was just noticing we're when we're recording this, we are almost at the 40th anniversary of the release of Temple of Doom.
Yeah,
because it was May 23rd.
May 23rd. It's coming up.
Yeah, almost exactly 40 years.
So you can actually this. Let me see. So we behind the curtain. We're not recording this right before it releases, obviously.
Right.
But this will be coming out a little after the anniversary. It's going to come out at the beginning of June. So.
See right there.
First Friday of June.
Well, by the time it rolled out across the country, this is probably when it premiered in your hometown.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
My hometown.
Which maybe I don't know. So with Raiders, they just like it was like one of the first movies that they just like pumped out into like 1,000 theaters right away.
Yeah.
They were it was a new tactic they were going for with Raiders, so they might have done that with this too. Who knows?
They might have. Yeah.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show. Let's get a bit into the deeper recesses of this movie. Let's dig in a little bit deeper.
Go down the mine shaft, if you
will. Let's do our descent into hell, if you will, and talk about the darkness of this movie. I have a quote from Lucas that kind of touches on some of the things we've been talking about as far as like why this movie ended up being the way it was. Lucas said, quote, "I think we went darker than any of us really wanted to go, but you're in the middle of it and you're doing things, and it's a matter of what you do every moment. And you don't realize what's happened until you put it all together and see it as one piece," unquote. And that's like exactly like kind of what I've been talking about of like they might not have necessarily known what they were going to end up with while they were making the movie. And so I think a small part of why this movie ended up the way it did is just because of that. It's hard to predict. They're shooting a funny scene here, a dark scene here,
Yeah.
when they're doing the production of the movie. But when it comes together in the edit, the darkness overwhelms all like the goofiness and the funniness really.
Yeah.
And I think that's I don't know what percentage you could put on the reason behind why it's so dark, but I think it is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of going for, they had intentions of it being darker. It wasn't like it just kind of happened. They were going for like an Empire Strikes Back of the indie franchise sort of thing. But a lot of people kind of like in, thinking about this movie and even like watching some, even Lucas himself kind of, I don't know if I wouldn't say volunteer. I'm sure they were asking him questions for the making of doc. But he said that I have a quote where he says he was going through a divorce at the time and wasn't in a good mood. And part of that is why they wanted something edgier. And Spielberg himself had just gone through a breakup with his girlfriend before this. So it's sort of a breakup movie. Like, a lot of bands have a breakup album, and this is sort of Lucas and Spielberg's breakup movie. Which I think has a lot to do with the darkness of this movie.
Darkness. I just lost my light in here.
Wow, that was a great coincidence.
That was a great coincidence. This light is on a timer, so it just said it was done. It's a real light on here.
There we go. Yeah, that's we talked about movie magic. That was a bit of podcast magic with the lighting.
It was, yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, with that in mind, now like with context of this being a bit of a breakup movie, a heart being ripped out of a chest.
I know, quite a symbol there.
Quite the symbol. A little bit on the nose.
On the nose, yeah. But only if you know.
But only if you know.
It's not really on the nose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
pretty great symbol.
Yes.
Even if you know, it's pretty great. Pretty great little moment there.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff. So you had sent me an article too. A lot of that stuff came up in my research that was in that article. But the interviewer for that art, which I'll try to remember to link it in the episode notes because it was a good.
I love that article.
Yeah, if people want to kind of just get a quick version of the deeper research that I did for this, it was a great like more condensed version of all the stuff I've read and listened to. But the interviewer asked Lucas, like, so is the heart being ripped out like your heart being ripped out? And Lucas was like, yeah, like he admitted it. He was like, yeah, it was. But I think he also said, but the glee with which it was done was Spielberg.
That makes sense. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. And that actually gets at something that I think people don't think about with Spielberg quite enough. Is that Spielberg has a mean streak.
Yeah.
He has a mean streak. And we think of Spielberg the sentimentalist, but he has a mean streak, and it shows up especially when he does sequels.
Yeah.
It shows up like The Lost World is a really mean movie. There's mean stuff in Jurassic Park too, but Lost World's a really mean movie. Or I always think about what Kubrick said. What Spielberg said, actually, not Kubrick, he was dead. But what Spielberg said about AI, he said everyone assumes that the dark stuff in AI is the Kubrick part. The dark stuff is all me.
Yeah.
And the sentimental stuff is all Kubrick.
Yeah.
And that's just there in Spielberg. And
I think I think I've read a quote from Spielberg where he says, if there's dark things in me, they will come out in my movie.
Yeah.
He's talked about that,
Yeah. And it's kind of what gives his movies that sense of danger. That's like an essential part of of his movies that make them. He's always kind of dealing with fear.
Yeah.
In his movies, and if you don't have danger, like you don't have fear, if there's not something to be afraid of,
Yeah.
and that meanness is just there,
Mhm.
and but there's meanness in all of us,
Yeah.
to some extent, and I think it's a really, for understanding Spielberg, really useful to know that that's there. I think it's really useful to see it
Mhm.
in movies like Temple of Doom and The Lost World.
Yeah.
I think it kind of like puts the sentiment and the grace and the wonder kind of in relief,
Mhm.
and makes you appreciate those all the more. You kind of understand their
Yeah.
importance,
Yeah.
both like in the film, but also probably to Spielberg as well.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a little bit of like Malick, like nature and grace kind of thing going
Yeah.
on, like within Spielberg.
Yes.
So
Yeah, because
I don't mind the meanness.
well, I think too, like I think that plays into a bit of like why this is a harder movie for people to like than a lot of
Mm-hmm.
other Spielberg, because really like a lot of his films have a little bit of meanness in it,
Mm-hmm.
and the meanness is usually like meant to invoke fear of some sort,
Yeah.
but also like most of those movies also kind of instill moments of like awe and wonder,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like less in
Yeah.
this movie.
Not a lot of awe here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that
Like
balance is off.
terror and horror,
Right.
but not awe.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think that balance is maybe just like a bit off for a lot of people for this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like for people that like can take the horror and the meanness and the fear and just like run with it, and they don't need the balance, which
Yeah.
that's like that's a thing. People
Oh yeah.
can like handle things in different ways and like
Mm-hmm.
take things in different ways. Like my wife will never be caught watching a horror movie, but I enjoy watching horror movies. I get a lot of like enjoyment out of them and
Yeah.
take a lot away from them usually. And it's just like different, different personalities or different,
Mm-hmm.
just different people take movies different ways. So
Yeah. I mean, and as I've gotten older, so this is a little personal history here with this movie. I told you, of course, Raiders was my first movie memory, and my
Mhm.
parents obviously loved. That's why they were watching it. They loved Raiders. My parents loved movies. They showed us movies all the time. They would sit us down to watch important movies. That's why I watched Duel, Spielberg's Duel, is because my mom and dad were like, you need to see this. This is so cool. You got to see this movie. So they were always sitting us down to watch movies, and but we were not allowed to watch Temple of Doom. That was one that wasn't okay in our house, and it's because of the darkness of it. Like my mom, she didn't like things that were super dark, and so I was like kind of kept from a lot of stuff like that growing up. And maybe that's why I have a curiosity for it. I'm older and can do my own thing or whatever. But like I do enjoy. I actually enjoy this like Temple of Doom kinds of darkness. Like I like that kind of like that like high contrast horror, supernatural horror kind of thing. Like I don't like slasher movies really, or like jump scary movies, but I like kind of horror ambiance type stuff. So like I've got like I absolutely love Hellboy. Pulling up my Hellboy volumes right here.
Very cool.
And I feel like Hellboy is much the same kind of horror as Temple of Doom. Like kind of like Hellboy's a bit of a Tomb Raider, and he ends up in situations where there's the blood of Kali and stuff like that going on all the time, and it fits the same. It's just the same kind of story, in a lot of ways, and I like it. I like there's like an awareness, like an honesty about evil that I really like. Because I think there is evil, like I think there is demons and devil and all that kind of stuff. Like I think that's real, and I don't think it's something to be like terrified of.
Sure,
but
a reality,
real, but a reality, and I like to see it this way, presented this way, and I like to see it overcome, and that's part of it too. I like to see it overcome.
and I think there's
does that.
I think there's too something to like. I think there's this contrast that happens in the Indiana Jones Spielberg movies too, between like they're friends and they line up in a lot of ways, but I think they also like approach that particular subject from like different perspectives too. And so you kind of get this like interesting mix of those perspectives in these indie movies of like
Yeah.
how do you approach the supernatural,
Mhm.
and it's that conflict ends up like being held within the character of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
He has the the conflict of like having seen these like supernatural things but still struggling with like what to do with them, and
Mhm.
like he's like a man of science, so he's
Yeah.
a archaeologist, and but also like is it's just is very
Well,
interesting. Yeah.
it's Han Solo's line, right? I mean, between Harrison Ford, it's Han Solo's line. I've been a lot of places, seen a lot of things,
Hmm.
and I've never seen anything that makes me think there's some kind of all powerful force holding us all together.
Yeah.
Like he's a skeptic,
Hmm.
and Indiana Jones is a skeptic. At least he is in Raiders.
Yeah.
Now, this being a prequel, that's a problem because he shouldn't be that much of a skeptic, but he is.
Yeah.
He's a skeptic in Raiders in the same way,
Yeah.
and I think that's the Lucas coming through.
Yeah, I think
Um,
the Lucas is the skeptic, and the Spielberg is the one that wants to like push into like
yeah.
the unexplainable. Like he
Well,
wants.
is there something there?
Yeah.
Why is that? What is that thing that
Yeah.
people are so
Right.
obsessed with?
The Lucas is like the part of Indy that's like, this is the stories they tell about this thing. And the Spielberg
Yeah.
is the one that's like, I don't want to jump too far ahead into like Last Crusade, but the Spielberg is the one that like makes him jump out onto like the invisible
Leap of faith.
bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's also worth noting that of course, the Lucas did make the Force, though. He did write the Force.
He did.
To existence. So like it's there is something in him that must
There's a
believes in
curiosity,
God,
maybe.
but there's a curiosity there. Yeah. There's at least a desire, a wish for something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Even if maybe he's more like Han Solo, but maybe he also wishes there was something bigger.
Yeah.
That he could do. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, I didn't want to point out another like interesting kind of. This isn't something that like Spielberg has ever like talked about or probably ever would. He doesn't really talk about Twilight Zone movie. There's a reason for that, and we haven't. That episode has not come out yet by the time this comes out, and so we'll get more in depth on all of that for that episode. But the long story short, there was an incident in that movie during his co-producer's segment, where a helicopter crashes and kills Vic Morrow, the lead actor for that segment, and two kids. And it was a big thing. It was a shadow over the whole project. Spielberg just wanted to be done with it and move on. He didn't even want to continue, but his lawyers in the studio, kind of were like, no, we need to go ahead and finish it and release it, despite this incident. And so a whole big thing. Well, don't want to spend too much time on that, but one kind of writing that or idea that I've heard that might be kind of a subtext here is a bit of leftover guilt from that Spielberg working through, because some of the things that happened around that were they were doing some illegal things with children. They had hired these children on illegally. They were working them at night near special effects, which was not allowed, even in the 80s, was not allowed. They were not supposed to be doing that. A lot of like deception going on with his co-producer that was directing that, and not really any no one was really like tried, or like nothing really happened legally as a result. So just like a lot of kind of left, I've heard some people speculate that Spielberg's kind of working through a little bit of that leftover guilt and a little bit of that darkness in this. Indy is at one point possessed and about to torture Willie and slapping Short round, and there's child, slavery and torture going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And, with that context, you can't help but think like, man, is he working through some of his guilt as being a producer for this movie that has this shadow of, that has killed 2 children because they were doing, sketchy things, trying to get around some of the rules and guidelines in place. I just can't. When I heard that idea, I was like, well, there might be something to that. I don't think it's something Spielberg would ever say, because I don't think he really talks about that movie anymore.
Yeah.
and understandably so. But but then you have, Indy saving the kids in the end, and maybe it's Spielberg working through trying to redeem his conscience a little bit. I'm saying conscious, I mean conscience, a little bit, having his hero save the kids in the end instead of them, dying like they did in real life. Now that wasn't his segment, and he claims that he wasn't there on set when it happened, which isn't that unbelievable. But you just can't help but wonder, like, is there a little bit of that going on too? Maybe that plays into the darkness of this movie some.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's speculation. The heartbreak thing is like confirmed.
Confirmed. Yeah. Yep.
Confirmed by Lucas and Spielberg themselves. Now Spielberg doesn't. He says this was his least favorite indie movie. He's a little bit more uncomfortable with the darkness than Lucas is. Lucas is kind of like, yeah, I understand it was probably too dark, but like, I don't regret it. I don't. And Spielberg is more like, he seems like he wouldn't say he regrets it, but he kind of says like he was just uncomfortable with some.
Yeah, he did. He has said that he wanted to make Last Crusade as an apology, and to make up for Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
So that's about I think as close as you get to him like saying he regrets it.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty strong statement, though.
Yeah. There's some you can read into that, what he's saying with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did try.
But I do think that Spielberg is a filmmaker who takes popular criticism seriously.
Yeah, he is.
And all filmmakers aren't like that, but he's like that.
Yeah, and I've even in some of my research for some of the movies we've already covered, like Jaws, for instance, he does some re-edits after a screening that some things didn't work. He changed it. He was like, well, this didn't work, I'm going to change it. And a lot of directors won't do that. They're like, well, that's on them. They should have got what I was doing. And Spielberg's not really like that, which is pretty respectable, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it is respect for his audience, for sure.
Yeah.
And
I think
he's like the other essential populist filmmaker.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I think a little bit of it. Oh gosh, I mean, I know you're doing early Spielberg on this series, but after The Fabelmans, I just feel like it puts every Spielberg movie in a different light.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about that. And
like if you're making movies, to impress your mom, and if that's always what you're doing, and if any kind of criticism of what you're doing just kind of feels like your mom getting down on you, you're gonna be a little more apt to take it a little more seriously than other people. So
and Spielberg too also is like, he's talked about how probably especially in his early career, his movies were kind of like his therapy. So like all of the things he's working through like come out in his movie, like he's working through them like as he's making films, because he was still sort of a workaholic at this time.
For sure.
And so I did write down this quote from Spielberg. He said, "The greatest thing I got out of that movie was I met Kate Capshaw." And then in another quote, he said, "Even though Indiana Jones wound up getting the girl, I really did." And he has this like big cheesy grin when he says it. I think it's actually how the making of documentary ends. It's with that
Oh, that's
quote.
funny.
Um, yeah.
That's really funny. That is
Um,
the one. That is the one moment in this movie that I never buy.
oh yeah.
I can buy him floating down to the ground in a life raft that they
Yeah.
inflate as they jump. I can buy all of that and have a scratch on him, but I cannot buy that kiss at the end at all.
Yeah.
I buy every moment before that. I buy every bit of Willie saying, "No freaking way am I going with you."
Yeah.
Like, this has been horrible and as far away as possible.
Mhm.
I buy all of that. I don't buy when he whips her and brings her back
Yeah.
and she's happy about it.
But I think Short Round plays into that and throws some water on the situation
Gets
with the
elephant.
elephant.
Gets the elephant to spray water on him.
He says what we're all thinking too. He says,
Yep.
"That's funny."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You're right, Short Round. That is kind of funny."
That's about as silly as it comes right there.
Yes.
I don't believe that Indiana Jones or Willie would want to have anything to do with those people each other. That's all that.
Oh man.
But Spielberg did, though. He wanted to have something to do with Kate Capshaw.
Oh yeah. Yes. And she did with him too,
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I guess we've kind of touched on a little bit, but we should probably like explicitly like ask the question: is this movie racist? And I think it's a nuanced. I think it's a little gray. I mean,
yeah, it's racist. I mean,
yeah, it is.
I'll just say it is. I mean, the same way that Raiders is racist.
Yeah,
I mean,
I guess it's just
Raiders,
it's one of
Raiders
those
is
things
racist
where
too.
it's like, yeah, I guess it's one of those things where like you want to excuse it for what it's trying to do and its time, but I guess like you shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, we'll just say it's not racist in intent.
Yes.
But it is in effect.
Yeah, I did write down a few things that I thought were like interesting, because I think it's racist in some of the stereotypes that it plays on, like the cultural stereotypes.
Yeah.
But then I do want to point out there are some things that you see where you're like, oh, okay, like it plays into like the strife for colonialism, like a bit, like you're like totally get like the prime minister is like totally like owning this British guy without explicitly saying anything. And it plays it like he's the smartest guy in this situation, the Indian guy, not the British guy.
Yeah.
And so like there's moments like that, and even like Mola Ram is like not dumb, like he's like very like smart, like he's playing things like he's kind of like minding, and like he's evil, but like he's not a dumb evil Indian guy, like right? And so like stuff like that, and even like the way Indy really kind of takes the shaman seriously, like in the village. Like he doesn't treat him like oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or oh, like he he treats him with respect. He like and he even like helps him out in the end. And so I think there are ways where like this movie, it plays on stereotypes, and that's like no doubt it's racist. But I think there are ways in which like it kind of like turns on some of those other ways that people have typically like displayed other cultures, and shows like no, there is dignity, and these people are smart, and these people are
I mean, I guess you could see a little bit of more a little bit of progression there. From like a little bit of 80s awareness. And progression there from what came before. I guess the question I ask is like, if you're going to make a movie like this, like James Bond meets Gunga Din, and if you're going to do that thing, and you're going to use the things that are in those stories.
Yep.
You know, the kinds of stories those are. Maybe you're just inherently misogynistic and racist.
Yeah.
Like, because those kind of stories are.
Yep.
You know, and maybe you can't escape that. Like maybe if you do the things you would have to do to make the story not misogynistic and racist, like then you're not telling that same story anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it would be totally different for sure.
Yeah. Totally different. So maybe the best you can do is what they tried to do. Like some of the stuff you mentioned there. Like maybe the best you can do is update some of it as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
I don't know that that's true, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing I think about. Like, I wonder if a question I do ask often about stories is like, is this stuff just baked in? You know, like, are these themes not even like racism, misogyny, just themes in general? Like, I've been reading a lot of really old stories, like Ovid, you know, and stuff like that, like ancient Greek and Roman myths and all this stuff, and like or Into the West. Like I read Into the West a couple of years ago, and some of the oldest stories that we have. I read the Enuma Elish and stuff, and like read the Bible. You know, like there's stuff in there that you're like, well, these themes are like the same. Like these story forms are the same. Like same stories we were telling then we're telling now, and a lot of the same kind of thematic and character material is there. Like, is that just what they are? Like, does it have to be there to be that story?
Yeah.
And what does that mean about how we should respond to those stories? Like, is it possible to tell new stories? Or I don't know. Like these are questions I ask, and I think you can feel it in Indiana Jones, like in Temple of Doom. Like, it's racist stereotypes. It's misogynistic. It is.
Yeah. Sure.
Maybe it has to be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of like, okay, when your crew is just a bunch of white dudes.
Yeah.
Like you have the married couple that's the writers. So you have a woman, and Kate Capshaw has her, she has her small bit of influence, but like really at the end of the day, it's a bunch of white dudes making a movie with a female character that you can't take seriously, and with like, they're what credentials do they really have to like speak into Indian culture? Like, not really any. I mean, they can do research, but they don't have like, definitely not like the moral authority to speak into it. But it's just one of those things. Like and I haven't seen The Color Purple, but I am interested in when I watch that and do the research of like how that plays in with The Color Purple, and bringing Oprah in to consult. I do know that was done, so I'm interested to see what that looks like for that, compared to this, where there's not really any there's not anything like that. They're not bringing in it. I mean, they have a couple of Indian actors, but one of them is like coming in and leaving every few days because he's shooting Bollywood movies, and I don't know that they're getting a whole lot of consulting work from them. So yeah. But yeah, I don't know that there's really like a lot of like praise to be given for maybe those small progressive things that they added in. But yeah, it is something that I noticed. It's at least something to see. Even if like you can't like pat them on the back for it,
It does feel like after this one though, Spielberg was like, well, you can always kill Nazis.
Yes.
You
can.
So you can always kill Nazis. So let's just kill more Nazis in the next one.
Yeah.
And then later on, it's like, I guess you can kill Russian communists too, right?
Yeah.
Let's just do that some. That'll probably be okay.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. And then everything we've said plays into the Willie Scott character too.
Yeah.
yeah, they were doing a ditzy character to play for laughs, but you know, it's a it's a bunch of white dudes like
Yeah,
making
yeah.
a
And when they made Marilyn Monroe play Disney characters, that was misogynistic.
yeah,
Like, so if
even
you're
if she
gonna,
was happy to do it.
yeah, which she
And
wasn't. Um,
right.
but are any of those actresses when they had to do that kind of thing? I mean, they like getting paid, but they're not
Right.
necessarily happy to play
And Capshaw
stupid
is
women.
I watched like a there's like a little thing with all of the main women from the first three
Hmm.
little interview, and Kate Capshaw does talk about how like she kind of feels like she's mixed on it. She's like, yeah, I had fun when I was doing it, and it wasn't meant to be taken seriously,
Yeah,
even though everyone did when it came out. But
yeah,
then she's kind of like mixed, but she's also like, but I did tell them like it's too much screaming, and
yeah,
yeah, it doesn't come across great. Like she's
yeah.
I think when it was closer to the movie, she was more like, "What's everyone so mad about?" But
Right.
then, like as time has gone on, she's like,
Eh,
"Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard. It'd be really hard. Um, I don't think she's bad in the movie. I think she's really good.
yeah,
And doing
hmm
for what she's given to do, I think she's pretty great.
yeah,
Um, it's really hard to follow Karen Allen though. It's really
yeah."
hard to follow
And that character was
Marion.
so different and
She's so good.
much stronger
Like,
of a character, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's so hard to follow that. I
hmm
mean, almost anything they did, was going to be lesser.
yeah,
You know. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show. Yeah, any other like themes? We talked a bit about like descending into hell and coming back out. Like you've got a little bit of like um maybe that's what Spielberg and Lucas are trying to do themselves. They're trying to like come out of the other side of hell better men than they were when they went in.
Yeah. I think the interesting how it deals with like religion is a big part of Indiana Jones
Mhm.
movies, or at least these first three.
Yeah.
Religiosity is a big part of it. And I think it's maybe this is another little bit of racism here, but I think it's interesting that in Raiders and in Last Crusade we're dealing with Christianity,
Mhm.
or Judaism, and then Christianity.
Yep.
Really is what we're dealing with, like the ark and then the cup. In those movies, the religious stuff is presented as powerful, as ultimately good,
Mhm.
and as worthy of respect and awe.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and in this one, we're dealing with a Hindu cult, and it's presented as horrific,
Yeah.
scary, murderous,
That's
and
true. Yeah.
evil. You know,
Mhm.
I think that's again maybe a little bit of racism again,
Yeah.
or a little bit of white blindness
Mhm.
or whatever. But I think it's interesting,
Yeah.
and worth thinking about. And then you think about Indiana Jones movies going on from there. You think about Crystal Skull, which ends up being aliens,
Mhm.
space aliens. It's a whole different kind of thing.
Yes.
But I don't know. I think it's interesting. Like the what's the right word? Like, of course, Judaism and Christianity are things that um, Spielberg would be much more comfortable with,
Yeah.
have much more knowledge of, and this kind of collie cult thing
Mhm.
would be much more foreign and other, and it is othered,
Yeah. It is.
as it goes to. And it didn't necessarily have to be. Like, we could have. I don't know why we couldn't have worked at the story somehow where um, it was treated with more kind of awe and respect, but
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And, yeah, it's just like, it's probably definitely amplified by the fact that they just weren't very happy with their lives at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
Um,
There's even the line though, like that he says, like, we're gonna, resurrect Kali, and then Kali will take over all the gods and all the world.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like a flipped colonialism kind of thing.
Yeah.
Going on. Which in that case, like, if you think of it that way, I'm like, yeah, I hope you win. Like,
Yeah.
get those colonials back.
Yeah.
Like, kick out their
It's
foreign
almost like
foreign gods.
that made me think of, it's almost like a Killmonger style villain in that way. Like, this is what the world has done to us, so I'm gonna fight back and become what the world has made me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, that is not
It's
in
not
Temple
in the
of Doom.
movie.
But there is a
Yeah.
version of this movie that could have had
It
that.
could have been that. Yeah. Because Killmonger is a great villain, but
it's a great villain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, probably wouldn't have had child slaves.
Sure.
And probably wouldn't have been killing people in the same way. Maybe he's a bad guy. But they could have done something like that. Make it a little more interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And we do have that village of people though, and they, their religiosity is not presented as necessarily as a scary thing.
Oh yeah,
so
for sure.
That's there.
Yeah, yeah. The only I do have one more quote that I thought was interesting. This is from Molly Haskell in her book Steven Spielberg: A Life in Films. She said, quote, "In Temple of Doom, an irresponsible man has to redeem himself by rescuing the children, but Indy's redemption comes a little too late for conviction in a movie 99% of whose energy comes from the allure of irresponsibility. Maybe Indiana Jones was Spielberg's last blowout of hyper-juvenilia." And I thought that was really, like, pretty insightful. As just like looking at his career and where it went from here. Because I mean, after this, you have The Color Purple, and then he starts. He has his moments of fun movies. I mean, you still have Hook and Jurassic Park coming up, but his movies in general get more serious and mature in nature. Sort of starting after this. So,
I mean, there's like with the tiny little arc that Indy has in this movie. It's the same arc that Peter Panning has in Hook.
Yeah,
it's the same arc that Alan Grant has in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's like a man who is obsessed with his career, and has to learn to be a family. Like, that family's good, and to be a father, and to be a father figure, and to have family's a good thing.
Yeah.
So that's a constant theme in arc in Spielberg's career. So,
yeah, and I wrote down
it's barely here, but it's there.
I wrote down too. It's more amplified in two movies that followed this that he produced in The Goonies and Back to the Future, where like sort of like Short Round amplified, where it's the kids that are it. It's basically like kind of nerdy loser dads that their kids have to like rescue them. And that's
which, hey, speaking of the Fablemans,
yes,
like in Spielberg's own admission that he blamed his dad for his parents' divorce for so long,
because he just didn't know.
Understanding it. Help his nerdy dad grow up.
But yeah, and then of course Kiwi Kwan in The Goonies also, which I did rewatch this past week. Just because I was like, well, this is kind of like a related movie with Kiwi Kwan and Steven Spielberg producing it. I mean, he's not a writer for the movie, but he is credited with the story, the story idea. So rewatch that. That's
you like The Goonies?
I do. It's like one of those nostalgia movies for me. That's like when I watch it now, I'm like, oh yeah, the writing on this is not very good. Like, especially like dialogue wise, but I can't help but love it just because
Grew up with it.
I grew up
Yeah.
with it, and like there's not really anything that anyone could say about it that would make me like not love it. So
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's just interesting that he goes on to like kind of have a last blast of that sort of movie with some producing work.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing we should hit on before we wrap up is just the fact that this brought on the dawn of the PG-13 movie.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so Spielberg
Yep.
calls up the head of the MPAA, Jack Valenti of the time. After I think it was brought on by both this and Gremlins, really, which had come out. And he was like, "Hey, I really think there needs to be something in between PG and R." And so they took that and ran with it and came up with PG-13. And so really, Temple of Doom is the reason we have PG-13 movies now. And
Yep.
Spielberg and Lucas kind of like were the filmmakers for 13-year-olds, really.
Oh yeah.
For a while. And so and yeah, it's just, to me, it's just another way that like Spielberg had such a huge influence on just the movie industry in general. Because if you think about it, what are like the highest grossing films of all time? They're all PG-13 movies.
Oh yeah, always.
Yeah, and so it's never PG movies, it's never R movies, it's always PG-13 movies. So yeah, it's just another way that Spielberg
Yeah.
it was such a huge influence on the industry. And yeah, really interesting. But yeah.
So do you think it was that he, well, you might know this. So was it that he didn't want it to be rated R, and so he needed something else in there?
I think
Or
there's probably a bit
or
of
was
that.
it-
I didn't read anything explicitly saying that.
Yeah.
But I think it's just the fact that I think it goes a little bit back to him taking his audience's criticism seriously. They got a lot of most people like really enjoyed this movie still. It was still a huge success, but they did get a lot of like mad
Don't take your kids.
parents, because it was so dark and they took their kids to it. And I think it's just another instance of Spielberg like hearing that feedback from his audience and taking it seriously and saying, okay, well, let's maybe do something about that. And I think it's probably mostly that, because it wasn't until after like this still had a PG rating.
Right.
It came out as PG.
Yeah.
And I think it's maybe since it is like after this and after Gremlins that the PG-13 came around. I would imagine it's mostly him just taking that criticism from his audiences seriously and doing using his power to do something about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've definitely seen some PG-rated movies from the 70s and 80s that I'm like, well, that should have been rated R.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
that
Jaws
was way too adult.
Jaws. Jaws was almost rated R, and they took out like just a short little moment of there's like the leg that bounces on the bottom, and they shortened that. That was the only thing that MPAA said they had to do to get it to PG. And so it bounced around a little bit more originally, apparently, and that was too much.
Too much. How funny. I've always thought about how movies like The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and stuff get around being rated R by either having or even the Marvel stuff. Like, the trick is just don't show blood.
Yeah.
Like you can cut somebody in half, but
the same thing in here in Temple of Doom. Spielberg was like, "Hey, don't do blood.
Yeah, rip a guy's heart out, hold it up, let it beat for everyone to see,
and even
let it drip.
Even like, even just as violent as that is at the very beginning, you got Indy like throwing that kebab into that guy.
Kebab to the guy who like sticks and burns and dies. I know, it's rough. Real rough.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. I think.
Oh, that does remind me of one of my favorite little. It's not like a big special effect, but it's like just a little movie thing. When the champagne pops,
Yeah.
and then the guy gets shot,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and then like the blood slowly comes out. Like I just love that little squib. Like however they did that to make the squib just like slowly to have the blood come out. That's perfect filmmaking.
Yeah.
Is what that is.
Yeah.
You know,
Little details.
so good.
Spielberg's good at
Yeah.
little details.
It's a blind little bit of filmmaking there.
Yeah.
There's some blood, so he let that blood stay in the movie.
Oh man. But yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
So I think the prime example of a movie that probably should be R, but just skirts around the rules is The Dark Knight, because it's such a dark movie. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
It's on the cusp for sure. It's
Yeah.
Um,
That's something I've always admired about James Cameron is he was just like, nah, give me an R.
Yeah.
Just go all the way in, give me an R, until you get to Titanic,
yeah.
Where you get a PG-13, but maybe should be rated R. Definitely shows a lot in that movie of death, and sex and nudity and everything else.
Yeah.
But still got the PG-13.
It did. Yeah, I actually told my wife, I was talking about the PG-13 thing, and I was like, highest grossing like Titanic. She's like, no, Titanic is R, and I was like, I promise it's not. She looked it up, and she's like, oh, I'm so surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just wrapping up our Temple of Doom talk. I had a final thought that I wanted to share, and it's just it's just kind of like maybe a little. I like to do little snippets to maybe take away. And my takeaway here is just that oftentimes your life seeps into what you do. It's just part of being human. In this case, it's life seeping into the art of Spielberg and Lucas. We talked about their heartbreak influencing the darkness of this movie.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to like reiterate. We kind of talked about you, especially you talking about like the meanness, embracing the meanness. It's not necessarily a bad thing when your life seeps into what you do. It can be depending on your self-awareness and your ability to check yourself. But I think this movie could have been so much darker if it wasn't this communal effort. That movies are communal efforts, artistic efforts, obviously. And, this could have been, if this was just like one man brooding on, his divorce, it could have been a lot darker of a movie. And it wasn't. It's still very dark, but it could have been a lot darker. And I just think it's an interesting kind of thing to maybe just like something to chew on is how does your life seep into what you do, whether it's like creating art or your work and your relationships in your life, and what are ways that you can check that through community, through self-awareness, through just kind of like taking moments to step back and kind of meditate on what you're going through and how it's affecting like who you are and what you're doing in life. And so we can all benefit from that. It's hard for filmmakers like Spielberg and Lucas, who were at the time workaholics and not taking time to stop and think about how their life was seeping into their art. And that might be why some people think it's too mean and can't handle it. But yeah, I think that's probably like a good little like food for thought to take away from this is just thinking about that, like taking time and thinking about how just your emotions are seeping into what you do and your relationships. So
yeah, that's good.
We kind of hinted at our ratings for this movie, but and where we would put it in Steven's filmography. I actually I'll go ahead and share. this moved up a little bit in my estimation with this watch.
Nice. Good.
I think I had it at like a 2.5 star on Letterbox, and I moved it up to a 3.
Okay.
And 3, my personal like little Letterbox thing is like usually like 3.5 star and up usually gets the heart, and then like 3 stars is like mostly like not a heart, but sometimes I'll give a heart. So I gave a little heart to Temple of Doom.
Okay.
I
Nice.
just enjoyed, and I think it's due to just like watching it in the middle of this series and like having an
Yeah.
eye for all the just amazing
Yeah.
work that Spielberg's doing in the filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
I think it plays a little bit into that. But yeah, I liked it. It moved up in my estimation. It's still my least favorite indie movie, I think,
Mm-hmm.
which, might change as I go into this series. If, I might rethink Crystal Skull, or I don't know. I liked Crystal Skull, the quirkiness of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I don't know, as far as like where it falls in his filmography, it's not necessarily my favorite. I have a lot of Spielberg movies I like more than this, but yeah,
There are a lot of Spielberg movies.
yeah.
So yeah.
It's hard to count it out too much for that. So
Yeah.
what about you? Where does this fall in the indie scale or the Spielberg scale for you?
Well, he has a lot of movies.
He does.
He has a lot of movies. He made a lot of different kinds of movies
Mm-hmm.
too. So I don't know. It's hard to think like where it ranks. I will say that it is. So I really like it when filmmakers miss a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I think it's really interesting when they miss a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
Especially the ones that are really really good filmmakers.
Yeah.
So I mean, get much better than Spielberg,
Right.
and so I think it's fun when he misses a little bit because I think it reveals things about that artist that you often don't see, because it gets like when they're good, you don't notice stuff because they're just good,
Mm-hmm.
like everything's just working. But when something's not quite working right, you hear things, see things a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
And Temple of Doom is one of those movies, for me, like one of the ones that he kind of misses on a little bit, but because of that, I watch it more and I think about it more than some of the ones where he doesn't miss. And so, yeah, so there's a few other ones like that for him that, like Hook is one of those.
Yeah.
Like, Hook is, I have nostalgic reasons for loving Hook
Mm-hmm.
because of one that I lived in my childhood, but it's also one that just all the themes are just right there on the surface in a way, and I like that about it. Or 1941 as well, like is one that most people would point to as like his worst film.
Right.
And maybe it is. I don't know. The worst film made by Steven Spielberg. That's still a pretty good movie. I think for better than any movie I would ever make.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's fun to watch that one and think about like, well, this is how he's trying to do comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the kind of comedy when he thinks about doing comedy. This is the kind of thing he thinks about doing, and that helps me understand his idea of what's funny a little bit better and see it better in his other movies. So, Temple of Doom's kind of like that, like, and it's kind of like pure horror, mean streak thing going on. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's why Lost World feels this way, or that's why some of the stuff in Jurassic Park, like, works the way it does, where you're just kind of like shocked by what you're seeing, or oh, that's what he means when he says that the hard stuff in AI is him, and the sentimental stuff is Kubrick.
Yeah.
Like I like that. That's why Catch Me If You Can is so melancholy. Like why he puts his characters through some things here and there. So I like that about. So this is I'm not sure where it ranks, but I will say it's one that I think about more than others.
It kind of acts like as a lens to almost to see other,
Yeah.
which is a perfect perspective to have for a series like this, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to like take each film not just on its own, but like where it lies in his
Yeah.
filmography and what it shows him about his filmography. And so like,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
think it's also, like we talked about, like a turning point for him too.
yeah,
And I mean, you look at that constant theme he has of workaholic men who have to learn the value of family.
yeah,
That's almost always there. And this is, I think, a moment when you can see like maybe he was working too hard and wasn't paying attention to what he was doing.
Yeah.
And then he realized it. And he changed the kind of movie he wanted to make after this.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good too for his career.
Yeah.
I also the other thing it kind of shows me about Spielberg is that he and Lucas set out to make a James Bond like character,
Right.
But they instantly failed. Like Raiders, like Indy is not like James Bond even in Raiders.
Yeah.
Like he has 2 arcs going on.
He has nothing together.
James Bond
too.
has no arc.
Bond is very put together, and he's like very fly by the seat of your pants. Like
that's right. He messes up constantly, but mostly he learns 2 things in Raiders. Like he has the one arc where he learns that God exists and he should respect that, and another is that he should stop working so hard and care about Marion more than himself.
Sure.
And so like he has 2 arcs, and James Bond doesn't have an arc ever.
Yeah.
And then in this movie, like even when they go try as hard as they can to make more James Bond like no arc thing, you still get a little arc in there. I don't think Spielberg can help it.
Right.
Like I think Spielberg like ultimately believes that people can change and get better, and that just ends up being in his movies even when he doesn't want it to be.
Yeah.
And
the sentimentality finds its way in, even in Temple of Doom.
Even
if you have
Temple
to
of Doom.
squint to see it, like it's there.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's still there. Yeah. Even if it comes too late, as Molly Haskell said, it's still there.
Right.
And he can't get away from it. And I think that's a big reason why his films are as popular as they are.
Yeah.
And a big reason why he makes the kind of movies he makes.
Yeah.
So for all those reasons, I love Temple of Doom. I really love the movie. And the way I do Letterboxd, I don't do star ratings on Letterboxd.
Yeah. I noticed that.
Yeah. But there are movies that I will heart. I heart them if they're movies that continue to speak to me and that I continue to return to, and that kind of become essential for me understanding what movies are, what certain filmmakers who certain filmmakers are, all that kind of stuff. So it's one of those.
Yeah, very cool.
It's a long answer to your question.
No, it was very insightful and very like relevant for the endeavor of the whole concept of my podcast. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm also like completely aware that like my own personal like rating and ranking system is totally arbitrary and subjective and pointless, but I love it anyway. So
everybody's
and I like hearing I like hearing what other people do too. It's fun to hear like how everyone different people use Letterboxd differently and for their own personal like cataloging it's always fun. Yeah, that's all we have on Temple of Doom. Next week we are going to be talking me and Elijah again about writing about film, so be looking forward to that. And the week after that, typically we'd be going back to Spielberg, but that will be my 50th episode. So
congratulations.
Yeah, I'm excited to put that out. And so we'll be doing we'll taking a longer break from Spielberg and maybe looking at some 2024 films. Maybe I might share some insights about what I've learned from the podcast so far, some stuff like that. So that's what we have coming up the next couple of weeks. So be looking forward to those. But that is all we have for this week. I've been Eli Price for Elijah Davidson. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.